Mitsubo Taishi hammered the computer keyboard, letting out a triumphant whoop as he sealed another victory. He devoured fantasy games, plunging into magic-soaked realms of ancient legend, crafting one-of-a-kind heroes and blazing across vast universes teeming with hidden secrets and looming dangers. Toishi snapped his eyes to the wall clock and decided to call it a night. He had to be up before dawn for work. Toishi, 29, a single, overweight man, toiled away as an utterly ordinary hired hand. He'd had enough of hopelessness that wouldn't let go, so he plunged into computer games, light novels, and the internet. He was a grown man who devoured fantasy and chased other worlds, but Toishi woke to the brutal truth. Those realms existed only in his dreams, and no one could change reality. This dull reality suffocated him, flat and predictable next to the blazing, thrilling worlds of fantasy, where every day hurled fresh challenges, demanded heroic deeds, and offered the chance to become something far beyond ordinary. He burned to become the chosen hero of a fantasy world. In every game he slammed Nord mode on, but if he ever landed there, he'd gladly flip to easy mode. It's all just a fantasy, the day faded, and will burrow beneath the blanket. And then sleep slammed into him, or he blacked out. Toichi dreamed he was plunged into a glittering fantasy world, a sweet bride lacing her fingers through his. That world dazzled with pure, breathtaking wonder. He was, strangely enough, a middle-aged man about to turn 30, just an ordinary fat office guy who glued himself to his computer, devoured games, surfed the web, then finally crashed into bed. That's how it was supposed to play out, until something exploded and tore the plan to shreds. Toisha jolted into a strange, choking tangle of vegetation, towering mountains looming like silent giants behind him. Panic clawed at him, but he forced his breath steady, fumbled for his glasses and found them gone. He'd lost so much weight his huge belly had vanished, and he was alone with no one who could explain what was going on. A voice crackled from a computer screen that materialized in midair, vowing to explain everything to Toisha and declaring the young man was trapped in the so-called other world. It answers to the name Isekai'D. The world Toisha wanted finally materialized, and it slammed into existence without warning. His beloved dog sat by the door waiting for him, and now no one could care for her. Meanwhile, the computer blared that magic exists in this world. We have to start making sense of it. The voice thundered that this world's progress matches his world's Middle Ages. Magic blooms everywhere, making it better here, while science barely stirs. Toisha pressed the invisible interlocutor for how to wield magic, and the voice instructed the young man to open the menu. Toisha heeded the advice, pulled up his inventory and found a short sword, scanned his skills with his jaw dropping as everything looked like a game, and it even showed his age as 19 here, though he was 29 in the real world. He wielded a dizzying array of skills, magic, fencing, countless variants, and could learn every one straight from the skill menu. We must ask, what does that mean? The voice boomed that the young man could rack up skill points at will, spend them to upgrade any skill in the menu whenever he leveled, and Toisha could instantly unlearn abilities that would normally take years to develop. He felt electrified. He could learn skills just by opening the menu. An adventurer's starter kit waited ready in his inventory, and a voice urged him to use it effectively. He'd only just picked up a handful of raw, mysterious skills and had no idea how they worked, so he couldn't resist racing off to test them somewhere. Toisha asked what he should do next, and the voice shot back that he could choose anything: become a hero or a villain, try to find his way home, or settle here and live out his days, and that last option wasn't bad. The voice vowed it would watch him now and then, and said if he wanted he could try to contact him. Then the computer went dark, and Taishi's life in another world began. At last the young man reached the city of the kingdom of Kalindale, and realization struck. He could read the writing and understand every word the locals spoke. They weren't ordinary people. Iron collars bit into some necks. They were slaves. He wished he could pretend he didn't understand how freedom worked in this world, but the hierarchy and the currency slammed into him. He had no clue what the current coin rate was. He slammed 5 large copper coins on the gate to enter the city, and still had 1 gold coin, 1 large copper coin, 2 silver coins, and 28 copper coins in his pouch. Will his purse run dry and drag him into slavery? He had to blaze a long, lonely trail to master the laws of this world. Ask anyone, and they'd call him crazy. The young man teetered between smashing mighty foes and rescuing princesses, or dreaming bigger, crowning himself king of the harem, and he wondered if that could actually happen here. He ached to bump into a kind girl, exactly like the one who'd just spun around and locked eyes with him. She stole every breath in the room, an impossibly beautiful girl. Meanwhile, Tuishi burst into the Adventurers Guild and called out, "Hello." The bald man behind the counter stared coldly and said he'd never seen the boy there before, and Tuishi shot back that he was there to register. he'd heard full registration could only be completed at the guild, then handed over his name and a temporary ID that only lasted 3 days. The bald band rasped his name, Oost, while Tuishi, relieved his body wasn't as fat as in the previous world, snapped a businesslike smile onto his lips. The young man declared he could fight unarmored with just a sword, command wind magic, and even patch wounds a little. Oost nodded, versatile skills, he said, but he had to walk him through a few registration requirements. First off, he can't spark trouble, never unsheathe a blade or unleash a spell to wreak havoc in the city. Guild adventurers must back each other at every turn, and killing another is strictly forbidden. Then Ust roared that he would now put his abilities to the test. The bald guild member marched the young man into the special training room, every stride a countdown to the trial ahead. All eyes snapped to the newcomer, as the gathered adventurers buzzed with curiosity. Oozing, the shield hero, whirled to adventurer Ethan, who greeted the bald man and the new recruit bound for Ishi. Ethan hoisted the wooden sword high, grinning, and thundered, "This is the perfect weapon for training." Toishi snapped into action, his weapon whipping through the air in a savage arc. The young man pressed his short sword into the bald old man's hands and implored him to keep it safe. Taishi's gaze snapped around. In this other world, gorgeous heroines were everywhere. He warmed up, vowed not to embarrass himself in front of the girls, then asked Usta to let him use magic. The old man warned that if he killed his rival, he couldn't use magic, but Taishi burned to try the spell he'd learned the instant the test began. Ust barked a command. Tuishi and Ethan, gear up and charge into the fight. Ethan hurled himself at Taishi with a savage lunge, but Taishi slipped aside like water and the strike tore through empty air. He slammed the hilt of his weapon. The crowd's thunderous cries spurred them on, and they surged back into the battle. Iton blurted to his opponent, stunned, "I thought you were just a poser who liked parading in gear, but you're shockingly skilled with a sword." He sized up his opponent, calculated every move before it happened, and knew victory was all but guaranteed. He countered again, wrenched the sword from Ethan's hands, then hammered a brutal kick into his stomach. Ethan wasn't an easy mark for Tuishi. He'd picked up deadly tricks, hardened his body, mastered the blade and hand-to-hand fighting, and hit second level in wind magic. The young man unleashed a roaring air vortex, tearing the air into a raging cyclone. Ethan rocketed into the air and crashed back several meters, and Oost had to concede, crowning Tai Kai Mitsuba the victor. The bald old man's eyes flashed as he declared the guy wasn't just lethal with a sword, he could wield magic too, and he was seriously impressive. Triumph surged through Toishi. He'd just unleashed his magic perfectly, and the spectators in the stands erupted into roaring cheers. There the young man locked eyes with the same girl he'd met not long ago on the city street. Oost spun toward everyone and snarled, "Who else wants to fight this guy?" 3 hulking men shoved forward, hungry to take him on. Oost erupted into congratulations for the barely alive Ishii. He'd become a celebrity by passing the test without a hitch, and now he needed to recover. The bald man thrust an adventurer's card into the young man's palm. Oost declared everyone normally starts at F rank, but he bumped him up to E. Taishi stood dumbfounded, unable to grasp the point of that promotion. The old man explained, voice like a prophecy, "Reach B and people will finally notice you. Hit A and they'll start to admire you. Reach S and the whole nation will hail you as a hero." Tuishi swallowed and admitted he still had miles to go, and Ust's eyes blazed with the wish that he'd become the best. To each she sprinted to the burning Golden Beds Hotel. He declared right there that Oost from the Adventurers Guild had recommended the place, and he wanted to rent a room for himself. The man at the counter snapped that if he was recommended by the Adventurers Guild, one night with breakfast would run 2 large coppers and 5 small ones, and renting the room for 10 days would cost 2 silver and 5 medics. The innkeeper snapped, summoning Hoipana, the inn maid, and barked for her to lead the guests into his room. The girl shepherded Tuishi to the door of the room and sent him off with a warm wish that he'd enjoy his stay there. The boy loved the room and slammed open his status screen. Toishi's eyes went wide as XP from the guild test flashed into his account. 6 skill points landed in his hands. He could snag a new skill, but he figured it made more sense to pump several practical ones because efficiency ruled. He slammed open his inventory and there, still waiting, sat the adventurer's set, with a single thought the operation menu, and every characteristic popped into his mind, insanely convenient. His adventurer's kit bulged with a blanket, a backpack, 3 torches, a flask, a short sword, an 18-meter rope and rations, and he wondered, if he crammed them all into one container, would they count as a single item? Could he just ignore their size and weight? He had to test it in the world called Isekai'D, curiosity burning in his veins, what adventures awaited him in the future. A message from the voice of God blasted onto the screen, "Call me anytime," but Toishi slammed it shut, deciding today's chaos was more than enough. A young man flashed back to the moment. He urged the girl to repeat what he'd said. And Toishi was totally blindsided. She confessed out of the blue and asked him to go out with her. A complete stranger blurted out a daring confession. He either thundered over to us or sprinted off to buy his own equipment. Just hours ago, he strode into a gun shop in the city bazaar, where racks groaned under a vast, dizzying array of weapons. The shop slammed into him with iron and leather. The young man prowled the aisles, heart hammering, forced to pick a single item from the mountain of wares. Choosing your first armor is a make-or-break moment, and a bright-eyed shopgirl leapt forward to guide him. She introduced herself as Louis, the clerk behind the counter. Taishi in turn gave his name and asked to buy leather armor, and those pointed ears revealed Louis was an elf. Tuishi's memory jolted to the instant Louis sprang forward and threw his arms around him in a sudden hug. Even with other visitors staring, the touch struck like lightning. She smelled intoxicating, and her body was soft and gentle. She steered him through the armor selections, voice bubbling with excitement as she asked Taishi which style of gloves and knee pads he liked. He shot back that he needed gear for hand-to-hand fights and swordplay, but he only had 9 silver coins, so Louis urged bolting metal onto his knee pads and elbows. His boots could be armored too, but that would push him past the 9-coin limit. He forced himself to like this strange new world. Then, out of the gloom, a colossal black cat loomed into view. The way Louise addressed him hit Tuishi like a lightning bolt. He realized the cat was the store's manager. The new world teemed with wonders, and the girl thrust a weapon into his hands to grant his wish for a sword. He could just as easily wield wind magic, and Louis snapped, "What about a guide for me?" Would Big Brother really unleash wind magic without a guide? Didn't he know it would fizzle into nothing and be utterly useless? She flung open a tiny box, a tube jutting from the bottom, and declared it the cheapest conductor in their shop. It looked like a plain wooden stick, but Louis snatched it up and shouted he'd noticed the difference at once. When he tested the conductor, he discovered it could unleash wind bullets. The effect blew everyone away, absolutely breathtaking. A jolt ripped through him as he realized he could siphon raw magic through this conductor. He turned to the girl and asked to wield it as a weapon. She dove behind the counter, declared they had a cheap mace-shaped conductor priced at just 6 silver coins, then flashed a grin and demanded a discount. The girl shot a look at her boss cat as it made a cryptic gesture, and Louis slashed prices on everything, even the entire purchase set. After arming himself at the weapon shop, Taishi charged back into the guild, and us told him he was now more like a real adventurer. The young man resolved to test his new weapon, cranking his pull-arm skill up to level 2 just for this. Tui hurled herself into training. When those abilities awakened, he felt it. The body's strengthening skill turned his legs into pistons for sprinting, and the swordsmanship boost anchored his whole frame in iron steadiness. Toichi's resolve ignited. He was ready to fight in this new world. That girl appeared as he sagged on the bench, chest heaving from a punishing workout. Right then she burst out that she and Tuishi should be together, explaining that she'd just become an adventurer. Petrified of facing monsters alone, she scrambled to join a group, but it all fell apart. She almost wanted to feel disappointed that it wasn't a confession. He wasn't declaring love. He was asking to team up as adventurers. She admitted she'd watched his ability test, seen razor-keen swordplay and raw, booming magic, and flat-out doubted he was a rookie like her. That's why she aches to be by his side. The truth slammed into Toishi. He finally understood why her worry never let go. Relief flooded him. This girl trusted him. She was impossibly sweet, and it stung that it wasn't a declaration of love. He'd been thrown into another world, a place where they'd do anything to him the second he let his guard drop, yet against every instinct he trusted the girl. She felt like a fraud. His faith in her felt too good to be true, so she hid a secret, and he ached to hear her real motive. Countless others were stronger than him, so why had she turned to him? She snapped that Toishi was almost certainly an ex-knight, or a battle-hardened mercenary. He was inexperienced, but his strength was alarmingly fierce. She longed to follow someone powerful, and anyone who saw Toishi would agree, but the young man knew this girl was hiding something. Us locked eyes with Tuishi and swore the girl could be trusted, staking his own honor to vouch for her. Tui clenched his jaw and forced himself to drop suspicion of the innocent girl. Rookie on the surface, she bristled with sharp knowledge and unexpectedly useful skills. He crept forward, every step measured. This land was utterly foreign to him. He hadn't decided anything about the group, so he shoved worry aside, thrust his hand forward, and declared his name. She flashed a dazzling smile, gave his hand a firm shake, and declared, "My name is Marl." Marl beamed that she was thrilled to go adventuring with Tayoshi, and when he saw how fired up she was, he urged her to accept the guild's request on the spot. Marl's eyes widened at the mister's sudden urge to jump into a mission right now, and the young man shot back that as adventurers, they were bound to chase down every scrap of adventure. He watched her dawdle. It hit him she had no hurry to get down to business. He soothed Marl, insisted everything was fine, and vowed that if danger erupted they'd bolt. He'd shield her from any harm. Those words hit her like sunshine. Her eyes burst open, shining with pure joy. Toishi lied to her out of a raw hunger for adventure, and after they accepted the guild's quest, he swore he'd never let the truth out, no matter what. They stepped outside, and Marl's jaw dropped as she brandished a weapon pulled from the void, proof he could wield the treasury. Toishi dubbed it storage, but in this world it was no simple ability. Marl was drowning in gear and knew travel would be brutal, so she burned with envy at Tuishi, who didn't have to carry anything. The young man replied that the ability was so rare he shouldn't tell anyone about the nature of his powers, then asked what kind of weapons Marl used. The moment he spotted the blade, he dared the girl to a quick spar, hungry to drag her true skill into the light. Marl unleashed a feral scream, then hurtled headlong at her opponent. Dread coiled in Aishi's gut. Her waist should have been straightened. That was all the warning she needed. She slammed into the ground, her beautiful thighs bared, desperation roaring as she wished she'd actually dodged that attack. He brushed off her idea, urging the girl to forget starting the group. Marl tore after him. She clung to his leg like a lifeline, and he saw in a heartbeat why no one let her into their squads. She was an absolute zero, unable to fight. Toishi implored Marl to abandon her dream of becoming an adventurer and return home to live a normal life. She spat, bitterness coiling through her words. She had nowhere left to return to. Her eyes flew open in horror as she jabbed a trembling finger at the bushes and cried to Tuishi, "Someone's coming." A savage boar stood there, a towering, fang-lined monster. Marl crumpled to the ground, terror choking her as the boar burst into view in an impossible instant. He called for the girl's help as he barreled straight at the monster, meeting it head-on. Marl stood utterly demoralized, tremors racking her body. Tuishi toyed with the idea of leaping into battle in another world, but he owed no one his protection. Marl's piercing scream tore through his thoughts, snapping him awake and warning the adventurers of the boar's attack. The beast outran anything Toishi had imagined. He couldn't fathom why it hunted him, and he couldn't break away. Ishii brandished his club, muscles coiling as he squared off to battle the board. With his skills unbound, the young man summoned a razor gale of wind-cutting magic. The boar's body rocketed into the air, then slammed back down, collapsing utterly motionless on the ground. Marl spun to Mr. Toishi, joy bursting out of her as she cried that he was alive. She spat at the girl, snarling that adventurers inevitably plunge into danger and that she would hardly be able to protect herself. He pours every ounce of himself into it, yet he might not have the strength to keep others safe. Marl shot back that F and E rank adventurers normally wouldn't stand a chance against a boar. She knew it, and she plunged into the adventure anyway. Taishi himself vowed he'd protect her. The young man shot back that every adventurer must protect herself, and she insisted her life was her own before admitting she was a little reckless. She couldn't become an adventurer. She lacked the skill to fight and only became a burden to Mr. Tuishi. He alone protected her, and she yearned to be like him. Aishi pressed his hand to the girl's head, relief flooding him as he murmured, "I'm so glad you're okay." Marl implored the young man to let her race down to the river to wash her clothes. When the boar charged out, fear ripped through her. Fear slammed into her so hard she lost control and wet herself, and now she's doomed to never marry again. Marl stepped close to the stunned Ishii, eyes hunting her face, and dared to ask if he could take her as his wife. Toishi and Marl plunged into the forest together and came upon two goblins. Marl warned the young man they were closing in. The monsters swelled to 5, and a lone boar crouched, poised to slam into them from behind. Tuishi realized Marl was useless in a scrap, yet her hawk-eyed awareness of every detail made his battles a breeze. She caught the boar's scent first. Isekai'D says she's got a freakishly keen nose. The Marl still had teeth. After a brutal showdown, Tuishi tore through the monsters, 3 small boars and 29 goblins. Fear clawed at Toshi in that fight. Real life hit harder than any game, and the old man who met them at the guild practically radiated joy that they'd returned alive. Marl stood stunned as Mr. Taishi picked off the monsters one by one, sealed them in his treasure box, and carried them home. The young man just shrugged. That's called inventory. Slid the adventurer's reward across the counter. She demanded how he'd totaled it, and the master snapped that the price depended on each body's size and condition. His small boars and goblins only fetched about 5 large coppers apiece. The old man barked how they'd split the money, by who actually pulled their weight on the hunt, and Marl owned up. She hadn't lifted a finger in the battle. Tui snapped Marl's his card, and she'd spotted the monsters long before he could even warn anyone about the attack. She rattled off enemy numbers and exact positions in the chaos of battle, so that count was well earned. Oost snapped that the share sizes still proved Toishi carried more of the fight. They're destined to blaze into fame as adventurers, a Magican sword prodigy clutching a treasure box, and a stunning girl whose uncanny senses pinpoint any opponent. Ust knew absolutely that they complemented each other flawlessly. Marl grabbed Taishi's hand, voice bright as she thanked her for today, and the young man mirrored her, gratitude blazing in his eyes. She vowed, eyes blazing, they'd storm the guild quest together again next time. Tui strode toward the hotel as he admitted to himself, this other world wasn't so bad. He stepped into his hotel room and crashed into bed, slammed by a pounding headache and a desert-dry mouth like a brutal hangover. Desperation clawed at him. He craved a single, aching gulp of water. A girl occupied his bed. He imagined roaming free in another world. Reality hit like a storm, and surviving here proved far fiercer than he'd ever guessed. As they said goodbye, Marl owned up that she hadn't been as useful as she'd hoped, then swore they'd tackle a guild quest together next time. When the young man slipped away, she told Ustu she wanted to go to the hotel because it was cheaper than this establishment, and the old man urged her to be careful. Night had already fallen. Her jaw dropped. There was Toishi in the tavern mid-meal. He caught her eye, beckoned her over, and invited her to join him at the table. Marl flashed a bright smile at Tuishi and said she was glad they were staying at the same hotel. It wasn't a coincidence. She had one single mission, get as close to Mr. as possible, whatever it took. She tipped the bottle, crimson wine sliding into the young man's glass as she realized Mr. Taisha's operation had begun, and the young adventurer grinned, thanking her. Because of her, he had money in his wallet and insisted they celebrate together. They hoisted their glasses, clinked them with a cheer, and drank to each other's health. Marl broke the ice and asked why Toishi chased the adventurer's life. Toishi said he'd spent his spare hours training under a teacher back in his hometown to push his limits, and now, tangled in reasons, he can't return to his homeland. She wasn't fooled, catching him dodging the question. She demanded, "Where are you from?" And Tui blurted that he was from Earth. Marl had never even heard of that place. She was dead certain it lay impossibly far away. She's dead certain Mr. Toishi's hair is jet black, his eyes slightly pointed and almond-shaped, his face strikingly handsome with perfectly balanced features, and his tall frame is proportional, lean, not bulky. He looked ripped straight from the fairy tales she grew up hearing at home. Marl felt a cold jolt. She couldn't return home now. The young man leaned in and demanded what she'd do next, and if she had anyone to rely on, and she snapped that the person she trusted was sitting right in front of her. Marl lunged in and confessed to the young man. Today she vowed she'd become his wife, no matter what. Right then their booze ran dry, and Marl snapped an order for more for Toishi. Marl demanded 1 bottle of nectar. She snapped she had no home left to return to and shoved the drink at Toishi. He had to try it so she wouldn't have to go back, even if only for today. Soon Toishi's tongue froze in his mouth, numb and useless after he'd drunk his fill. He barked at Marl, refusing to believe a girl her age would spend the night in a hotel with a man she'd just met, and Marl's jaw tightened as she realized Toishi was the sort of drunk who couldn't hold his tongue. Toishi muttered she was too irresistible to lose, and he kept drinking because worry for her gnawed at him. Marl told Toishi that whenever he shielded her, she glimpsed a gentle side that blew her away, and even when they crossed paths in the city, it felt like a fateful, God-blessed meeting. Even then she fell for him, and Toishi's thoughts exploded into one burning question: why did she become an adventurer? She suddenly proclaimed, "I'm actually a princess." 2 years ago she was due to be married to a scumbag prince from a neighboring country. Everyone whispered he was awful, so she slammed the door on the match, declared she hated it, and fled the castle to become an adventurer. The young man scoffed at the cliché. A princess meant he'd never be free to hang around her, and Marl blurted, wouldn't it be better if the adventurer Toichi married the princess? Tui stammered, cheeks burning, don't you have a family? You could have stayed in your hometown instead of chasing adventures. Marl arched her back like a dancer, flashed a sly smile, and shot Taishia the question, am I not pretty? Dizziness slammed into Tuishi, and he shot back, I didn't say that. The young man drank himself senseless and tumbled straight under the table. Mara pressed close, voice cracking, I'm more worried about you than anyone. He grinned and declared she was far too cute for him to get completely drunk. She urged Toishi to lie still for a moment and vowed she'd take care of the rest. Marl grinned like a mastermind. She'd orchestrated the whole thing. He seized her hand and sank down to lie with her on the cloud-soft bed. Toshi shot awake, reeling from a brutal hangover, and daylight was already flooding the room. Shock slammed him when he found Marl asleep at his side. Trembling, he laid a shaking palm on her chest to prove she was real, and she blinked. Marl cracked a cryptic smile and shot Toishi a sly, "Good morning." He couldn't believe it, he screamed. Marl, unnervingly calm, asked him why he was so cruel. Who screams after a night with a girl that gorgeous? Toishi then demanded to know why she was in his room. Marl shot back, "If you don't remember a thing, I'll tell you everything." A young woman of suitable age shared a room with a man she knew. Then Toishi drank himself senseless, became obsessed with her beauty, and she was forced to endure terrible trials. Toishi claims her now, rightfully his, free to indulge and revel with her to his heart's content. He couldn't stand hearing that, so he barked an order at himself to calm down. If he didn't take responsibility, Marl's innocent image would be shattered. Color flooded Marl's cheeks as she blurted out that Toishi-san was always on the move. When she admitted she was afraid, he slipped behind her and wrapped her in a tender, protective hug, and she cupped his face with both hands, pleading with him not to press for details. Guilt slammed into him so hard he couldn't bring himself to meet the girl's eyes when she asked if he was angry. "Don't drown in tears over spilled milk, she's fine." Toi tore into himself for squandering the chance. He couldn't even remember his first night with a beauty like her. Then Marl pulls the young man into a gentle, heart-stirring embrace and whispers, "Can we do this again?" Right then Hopina rapped on the door and announced she'd come to clean the room. He sprang out of bed and asked her to tidy up so he could come back later. Then he and Marl vaulted out of bed and yanked on their clothes. Marl burst into view stark naked, utterly unashamed. Toishi blurted that she looked unbearably erotic dressed up, and she laughed, delighted, and sure he'd been set on fire with desire. Toichi demanded the girl calm down and swear he'd protect her no matter what problems arose. Bound as companions, they charged off to have breakfast together. Marlon Toichi strode down the town street as the girl nudged him and teased, "Looks like a date." Toichi couldn't imagine ever hanging out with someone as pretty as Marl in his old world. He was content with everything back then except the stubborn weight clinging to him, so being here felt like a dream. They stepped into the gun shop and a new girl, Taishi Ora, greeted them. Toichi insisted on one last walkthrough. The club he'd bought here had saved him from the monsters, but it was cracked beyond use, so he came back to hunt for a new weapon. He leaned in and asked Marl if she'd ever been to the store. She admitted she'd been a couple times, then spun to the salesman and declared he wanted to pick a weapon to defend himself in the next battle. Cat Lewis burst forward himself to serve Marl, inspected Tashi's battered club, and declared the weapon had clearly been through brutal trials. His weapon turns lethal in battle, and everyone says rear-line mages depend on it. Mages don't fight on the front lines. Toi spun to the talking cat and said he wanted a more durable weapon. Lewis cut in asking about their budget. The boy prodded Marl on what she planned to buy, and she replied she wanted a light crossbow she could wield. Taishi swept up everything he needed and haggled for a discount, but the cab smirked and tossed him a paltry favor, 24 crossbow arrows. Stingy as it was, the young man was forced to accept. Marl snatched a crossbow, while Taishi Lewis recommended a fighting staff, nearly identical to his previous one, and hailed it as brutally useful. Marl snatched up a crossbow, and the moment she gripped it, she felt like a real adventurer as her self-confidence surged. She stormed into every journey, utterly fearless with Toishi at her side. Toichi locked himself away and threw himself into brutal, relentless training. One of many, he locked blades with Ethan. Marl's been pushing herself with the other adventurers, and her skills are razor-sharp. Against Toishi, Marl couldn't claim he was stronger yet, but his power kept surging. Ishish's level kept surging from brutal training. He could buy skill points, so he funneled them into strengthening his offensive and recovery spells and sharpening the magic he'd acquired on his first day in this world. But if he wanted to indulge in fantasies, he had to do it with the bare minimum of magic. He poured 3 skill points into fire, water, and earth, blasting each magic upward. At level 2, the skill point system unlocked new skill types and tiers he could learn. He tumbled into the other world called Kalindale for the first time. A mysterious voice rang out, and a flood of questions surged in him, first and loudest. Why had he become 19? He brimmed with skills and probed whether hand-to-hand combat, archery, and cooking were unlocked right at level 1. It mirrored the experience he'd carried from his previous life. He learned archery as a kid, mastered negotiations in the hotel industry, and had always cooked his own meals, so the cooking skill made perfect sense. Martial arts tiers. Level 1 is an experienced fighter, Level 2 a title holder, Level 3 the teacher class, Level 4 the superior class, and reaching Level 5 crowns you with the Superman class. Suspicion flared in Toishi. he refused to trust the mysterious voice, locked eyes on Amaro, and called out to her. He invited her to be his magic practice partner, and Ethan barked at him to go easy on the girl. Tuishi grinned mysteriously and declared he had one more magic to wield. It needed testing on Marl, and he figured that if he told the girl he'd gained it through skill points, she'd team up with him again. The instant Marla nodded, Tuishi barked the command, "Shoot him with the crossbow." He steadied the startled girl, and she fired. Tuishi slammed his palms into the earth and unleashed earthwall magic, a jagged stone barrier erupting up to cut off the path. The arrow slammed into the wall, leaving the young man unscathed exactly as he'd predicted, the spell living up to its name with a rock-solid shield. Then he snapped at Marl to fire again. Another arrow screamed from the crossbow, only to slam into a towering wall of water she conjured with her new magic, freezing the bolt solid. When that water wall smashed into foes, it sliced clean through them and crystallized their insides, a merciless, lethal technique. Ethan beamed, relieved the magic that had injured him wasn't like this, but Tuishi also wielded fire, and Uzi warned the boy it was deadly dangerous and would land him in deep trouble if the guild was swallowed by flames. Each attempt taught him a magic arrow could be pure Tier 1 magic. When he blasted one from the hotel window into the sky, it proved magic arrows needed no attributes, and even as Tier 1 it outmatched attribute magic, pure power was enough, and he could easily raise it to Tier 2. He slammed his restoration magic up to Level 2. Level 1 healed wounds, Level 2 purged poisons, even alcohol. Even now, Toishi's razor-sharp judging eye was his single most vital skill, and the burning question of who Marl truly was gnawed at him. She met his stone-cold stare and snapped, "Why are you looking at me so seriously?" Tui pressed again, asking why she became an adventurer, and Marl repeated that she was the first princess of a certain country, that they tried to marry her off to a scoundrel prince from a neighboring country, so she fled her home. She swore she'd never go back. She'll wait 3 years until her younger sister takes her place as that prince's wife, and only then will she return. Toishi unleashed his new judging eyes and pierced Marl's disguise. Her true name was Mario Vlank Miscronia, the first princess of Miscronia. Toishi froze, stunned. Silence hit him like a punch, his mind blank, and he had no idea what to do. He remembered how, as a simple adventurer, he'd shared not just one night but several with a real princess. He slammed into the truth. Marl was hiding something. She worried about the knights and mercenaries, and she'd already fled the noble country. Marl proclaimed Toshisan would keep adventuring, grow stronger, become a feudal lord, and aim for the harem. The young man didn't oppose it, so why is this coming from the mouth of a girl? He was certain a harem tomorrow would be fine. A male adventurer with multiple wives struck him as normal, and their children boasted prime genes and often inherited their parents' superior qualities. Toishi still couldn't make sense of the world's ordinary rules, and Marl warned that adventurers who keep facing life-or-death situations die easily because the crushing physical pressure overwhelms anyone who faces it alone. She blurted she was fiercely jealous and couldn't stomach anyone stealing her first partner, Taishi-san. She saves those words for no one else, only Toshi hears them. Struck by how cute Marl was, he swooped in, pulled her into a tight hug, and kissed her. Tears threatened to burst from Marl's eyes, emotion ripping through him. She crashed onto the bed. She locked eyes with Toshi as he leaned toward her and demanded whether he'd keep her awake at night again, and the young man shot back that it depended on her. When she finally fell asleep, Toishi imagined that the instant anyone chased them, they'd bolt away together. He swore he'd move heaven and earth to make this girl happy. With shooting now in his arsenal, Tuishi snatched Marl's light crossbow, desperate to jolt his sagging spirits back to life. Train like this and you'll unlock a new skill. If you want to save points, learn it from the very start through training. Just then Marl barreled up and cried they'd been given a task to clear out the goblins. The guild swarmed with people. New orders crashed in like a tidal wave. Adventurers swarmed to Tuishi, crowning him a wizard. The youth swore it was his relentless magic practice over the last few days. It made him stick out, and when he looked closer, he realized the guild's training ground had not a single magician. They were gearing up to annihilate the goblins. The Knight's Order and every other troop were targets too, and Toishi scoffed, certain the job would be a breeze. Ust bellowed the order: wipe out every goblin, storm the goblin village in the forest, a half-day's march from the city, and if they go on foot, they'll earn 5 large copper coins for each goblin they destroy. The guild dangled 2 silver coins ahead for anyone who joined the cleanup, and vowed to refuse payment to anyone who didn't lift a finger. The gathering kicks off tonight the moment the night bell tolls. They could be stranded in the forest overnight, and the mission might stretch about 2 days, so everyone has to pack food. A jolt of memory hit him. the guild counter sells incredible canned goods for next to nothing. Toishi and Marl dove into preparations, leaving no detail unchecked before the mission. They piled 3 days' worth of canned food into their packs, bundled a few extra blankets, and clipped on a flashlight. This mission would need every beam of light. A barrel of water thundered into the storage room. Toshi paused, then shoved 2 more inside. Oost's jaw dropped as Toishi's magic box devoured far more than its size promised. The young man grinned and said he never stuffs it to the brim, so he doesn't even know how much it can really hold. At last the call to move out sounded, and a roaring tide of adventurers and knightly order members surged into the rendezvous point. Toishi crackled with confidence as their levels surged through relentless training, their arsenal of usable weapons swelled, and Marl honed deadly marksmanship. Mitsubo Toi burned with eager anticipation, poised to plunge into the adventures that lay ahead. Toishi's magic is a skill system that forges a blazing fireblade, and he's itching to learn how to take on a real wizard. I can't wait to see what her abilities can do. The squad surged forward with a level 10 scout, a battle-scarred veteran adventurer, darting ahead while the main block of knights thundered behind. The newcomers pushed on with the column for a stretch, barely troubled. Only a few feeble monsters dared strike. Knights slammed into the front, becoming a living shield for the troops, while the rest locked down the rear. The troops formed a living shield around the wizards, but earlier when the goblins showed up, they tried to pry the casters from their guards and only struck a handful of units. The goblin attack struck out of nowhere. Just then, a massive horde burst into sight and the command thundered, "Everyone, get ready." Roaring monsters thundered closer as the front began to buckle. He begged her to wait until tomorrow and pleaded with her not to charge ahead. Goblins burst into view up ahead and surged forward, snarling as they lunged at the adventurers. Tuishi hurled himself into brutal melee with the others, carving through the monsters one by one. Toishi's eyes flew open in shock as the goblins barely joined the fray, darting past them, and Marl assumed they were fleeing from something. Marl's danger sense ignited. She just caught the faintest whisper of trouble. Something far stronger than the goblins revealed itself, and the adventurers froze as a wild cry rang out ahead. They stood over the slain adventurer and knew the man chasing the goblins could fell someone with a single, merciless blow. Next to the goblins, this creature towered a genuine monster. Tuishi calmed the girl, his steady voice promising she'd be fine. Screams and shouts thundered closer as Toishi locked eyes with Marl and urged her to trust her own knowledge. The girl snarled that it was the Goblin Eater, a beast cloaked in the troll's dark mystery. A savage roar and thunderous stomps ripped the air apart as a menacing brute erupted into view right in front of them. Everyone expected a goblin hunt. Nobody saw the chaos that just exploded into the quest. Toishi cut in with a harsh warning to the adventurer approaching the wounded man. "Watch out, danger." The adventurers and knights slammed a pincer assault from flank and rear, betting the troll's lumbering bulk made him slow. Their counterattack misfired, and the monster shrugged off only shallow wounds. The attackers didn't escape unscathed. Wounded fighters lay among their ranks. The leader barked that they couldn't relax. Their knights were gone, and ordered everyone to pull back immediately. Tuishi snapped, slamming his veto on the table. Marl had already exposed the troll's weaknesses. Minor injuries sealed in a heartbeat, so the young man unleashed blazing fire magic. The troll's regeneration couldn't withstand the blaze. Toishi loosed a searing fire arrow, the leader gaping at his fire magic as that single strike shattered the monster's healing. The troll unleashed a bone-shuddering roar as the knight's armor clanged like iron bells. Toishi unleashed the energy blast, the surge ripping free and detonating in a deafening explosion. A savage counterattack slammed into the wounded monster. Wielding the adventurer's shields, the leader surged within arm's reach of the troll, a sword gripped tight in his hand. The troll was killed when they snapped their shields into a staircase, surged up, and toppled the hulking beast. The knight's leader cut the troll down with a single, flawless, lethal strike. He thanked Toishi with a grateful roar, declaring that his support had let them get away with almost no losses. It wasn't over. 3 more monsters exploded into view right in front of the stunned fighters. Toishi funneled every scrap of magic into a crackling core, then hurled a blazing energy blast straight at the monsters. The knight commander surged forward, cutting through the wounded troll's cries as he bellowed for the injured to fall back. In an instant, Toishi the magician surged forward, and the young man realized that, despite the beast's massive bulk, its weak points were human. He had to strike straight for the head. He hurled a brutal strike at one of them, and it connected dead on. Suddenly, 2 more monsters materialized beside the fallen beast, forcing the adventurers into a frantic retreat. One of the trolls' attacks tore through the air, missing its target by inches. Tuishi sidestepped the blow with lightning grace, then slammed his weapon into the beast's head with a thunderous, bone-shaking strike. A hulking behemoth reared up before him, and the monsters seemed endless. Toishizu's battle staff jammed deep in the last monster's skull, and no matter how he yanked, it wouldn't come free. Facing that opponent empty-handed was a one-way ticket to disaster. Everything snapped, the situation plunged into a make-or-break crisis. Toishi clutched a lone dagger, and the last fraying threads of his magic diminished, yet enough for him to slip away from the battlefield. His eyes snapped to a crossbow bolt buried deep in the monster's paw. Marl fired point-blank, buying Toishi the opening to retreat. Because of this, the monster snapped its focus to tomorrow, and the young man poured the last of his magic into the dagger, determined to deliver the decisive blow. He shoved every last scrap of strength into the strike, unleashing a desperate, earth-shattering blow. A bone-rending screech tore the air, and Tuishi's breath caught as the dagger lay shattered. His weapon gone, he channeled every last ounce of magic into his clenched fist. Then Toishi lunged forward and struck his opponent with a savage blow. The monster crumpled. Taishi's gaze fell to the shattered dagger, sorrow coiling in his chest, relief ripped through him when the staff lay untouched. Marl hurled herself into Toi's arms, sobs racking her as tears flooded down. She saw him drenched in blood and knew he was gravely wounded. Ishi yanked her into a steadying hold, poured healing into her wounds, then berated her for defying his order to run away. He stroked her head, voice low and fierce. "I kept my promise again. I'll protect you no matter what." Marl dissolved into tears of joy as Toishi let out a long, relieved sigh. Ethan popped into the moment, grin wide, and asked permission to pet the girl's head too. This time it looked like it was over. The knights had crushed the trolls, the goblins had quieted, but 3 adventurers lay dead and 7 were wounded, 5 of them badly. 6 knights staggered under moderate wounds, and the rest nursed light injuries, yet cold statistics can't reveal the true toll. Ethan gripped their hands and declared that anyone on the same quest must always help one another. He rasped that his arms were shot, he couldn't even heft a spear, couldn't restoration magic heal it. Huddled by the blazing fire, Toishi choked out an apology for failing to fully heal his wound, and Ethan's chest clenched with bitter regret that Miss Witch couldn't heal him. Marl thrust a water flask at Toishi, voice raw with thanks for everything he'd done. They'd poured healing magic into the fight countless times, and resting was out of the question. Relief flooded Toishi, the 3 barrels of clean guild water he'd dragged and pumped life into his treatment, mending even the seriously injured so they could walk the return route with no trouble. Facing the last troll, Taishi hurled himself between it and Marl, desperate to shield her, channeling magic into his body instead of a weapon as the magic skill fist burst to life, now far stronger. 6 trolls ambushed them. He tore through 3 alone, so he's owed a hefty cut of the rewards. Toichi sank onto a log beside Marl, joy flooding his chest. The leader of the Crossroads Knights, First Captain Waltz, and the commander of the mage platoon, Lynette, stride up to the mage and thunder their thanks for his invaluable assistance in the battle. Waltz smirked and owned up. Thanks to him, the trolls were crushed with minimal losses, and he boldly declared his strength A-rank worthy. The young man blurted he was only an E-rank adventurer. He'd only become one 10 days ago, and this was just his second quest. Lynette gaped at the young man, convinced he was pulling her leg. The captain thundered about the brutal training needed to become such an adventurer, and Toishi snapped that the village masters had forged him in magic and combat. He'd come from another world, urged on by a strange voice. Waltz thrust his hand toward Tuishi, declaring that Tuishi's success had saved his knights. Any reward would only come if he left his contacts. The young man shouted he'd be waiting by the central square in the southern district of the Flame de Verne, and with that the goblin clearing quest was finally over. After dawn, several knights raced out to scout and found the goblin village razed to the ground. Turns out those trolls pulled it off. The first goblins bolted under their assault. Some fell, but the survivors endured, and it was a victory. Now calm reigned, everything was fine. Lynette stormed up to the young man and snapped that the knights had their eyes on him, but Tuishi stared blankly, unable to grasp what she meant. She warned him to cut ties with those people. She shot back that he'd already decided not to join them. He plunged into another world and purged countless things, but distrust churns whenever the knights appear. Marl's worried sick. Is there a hidden connection? A vital piece had slipped from his grasp. He couldn't fathom what was unfolding in the kingdom. Meanwhile, right here in this kingdom, and not just Kalindale, but across every corner of Isekai'D, one figure commanded the most powerful force alive. God's voice boomed. Who was he, this shadowy, mysterious presence? Tuishi didn't know the first thing about clinging to freedom in another world. Bloodied and breathless from a deadly clash with the monsters, the adventurers staggered into the guild as the hall erupted in cheers and warm embraces. Toishi and Maro leaned forward, curiosity blazing at the city's residents, who returned a warm, sincere smile. The townspeople erupted in grateful cheers. Safety had finally returned to the crossroads. Trading the adventurers' lives meant the crossroads people had to be protected. That's exactly what knights exist for, but Waltz's gut burned with one question. Do I turn Marl into the guild? She staggered home from her first brutal multi-day raid, every muscle burning, and Ethan grinned, urging the rewarded youngsters to blow off steam with a raucous night of drinks at the tavern. Ethan boasted he'd slain one, maybe two, goblins. Oost barreled into congratulations, admitting he'd been terrified when they stormed the goblin village, then melted into a relieved smile when he saw they were all safe. 3 of their colleagues lay dead. Trolls slammed into them without warning. Without the knights, they'd have all died, and afterward the old man demanded to inspect their cards. Toisha demanded to know what would become of the dead adventurers the knights had carried off. The master replied they'd be buried in the city cemetery, and their personal belongings would be given to the families of the dead. After poring over the Toisian morals maps, Ost reeled. He couldn't believe the magician had obliterated 3 trolls. Ethan swore he saw it with his own eyes. The guy blasted a troll to ash with raw fire magic. Another adventurer declared he'd impaled the second troll with his staff, and Marl whooped that Mr. Taishi ripped the last one apart with his bare hands. Toishi squirmed under the praise, but he'd already been crowned the wizard. He ripped charred troll corpses from his magic chest. No one saw it coming, and the old man whooped that their skin and bone would be reforged into armor, their fat handed to alchemists, and their meat would fetch top coin, but each corpse had a mangled skull. Trolls devour coin, so the guild orders adventurers to bring magical monsters straight to its halls. The raid paid just 2 silver coins for showing up, so Oost couldn't pin down the final tally, but he swore he was owed about 30 gold for the troll and another 5 for conquering it. The haul hit roughly 105 gold pieces, a shaky guess, not a nailed-down sum. Marl's jaw hit the floor at the payday for a single quest, and Tuishi couldn't even picture that sum. It turned the usual adventurer's salary into pocket change. The adventurers roared with triumph, slamming tankards, bellowing toasts, and downing every last drop. After Tuishi pocketed the conquest reward, about 20 adventurers rushed forward to sign up. The young man ducked into a tavern and slammed 5 gold on the bar for unlimited food and drink, much better than trembling over every coin. The girls leaned in, eyes blazing, savoring Mr. Taishi's charm and peppering him with questions about his daring adventures. The young man spotted a few guys seething with jealousy and roared that Seiken food was completely free today. Moral flashed a dangerous smile and snapped at the girls pestering Ishi, "Keep your hands off him." Night pressed in as Marl and Taishi finally tumbled through their front door, home at last. Marl crashed into sleep long before Taishi even slid into bed. He'd already grown used to this life, but before he was pulled into Isekai'D and met Marl, he was just an ordinary 29-year-old on Earth, trapped in the same grinding routine every day. Now, thanks to her, boredom is crushed by wild adventures, and Marl loves him. He leaned in, voice raw with gratitude, and said, "Thank you." Marl snapped her eyes open and shot back that even if he poured out the sweetest words, merely looking at other girls was unforgivable. Tuishi cocked his head and asked if she was really worried about that. It was an exact match, and dread clawed at him for her. When Marl sprang into the fray during the quest, he forced calm into his bones. If Taishi lost, Marl's very reason for living in this world would vanish. Marl's heart soared when she realized Taishi wasn't indifferent to her, but he raised a hand and asked her not to interrupt. He flung himself onto her bed and snarled that the insolent fool would strike her now. Late into the morning, Marl lay cocooned in bed as Tuishi warned the day was nearly here and insisted she get up, and Marl declared that staying up until the morning was pure, cruel violence. She might be carrying a child, but she's a battle-hardened adventurer whose guild sealed her with contraceptive magic. Female adventurers tap the guild's services. If needed, they secure contraceptive magic beforehand. If one becomes pregnant, she's pulled off the road and forced to stop adventuring. Tui's gut screamed that something was wrong. It felt off. Even if one adventurer became pregnant and the party splintered, the others vanished from sight. Hunting for a new band turned into a brutal gauntlet of complications, and that explains everything. Marl's in his band now, so she must have been through hell. Marl snarled that some of them are vulgar demons wearing human skins, so most adventurers learn contraceptive magic. Toisha's gaze slid over the girl's silhouette. The girl went crimson and blurted, "What kind of look is that?" For adventurers, marriage is routine. Sparks fly on the road and they wed by the dozen. Toishi wrestled with the idea of marrying Marl, desperate to learn more about her, and today they'd finally find out how much they'd pay him for the trolls. Before that, he set a date with Marl, barked for her to get dressed fast. She grabbed his hand and they sprinted to the guild. Listen up, they stormed straight into the gun store. Toishi winced, admitting his dagger had shattered in yesterday's battle. An adventurer without a weapon was useless. Lewison the cat darted over to the young men and jabbed Toishi with a knowing look. What do you need this time? Toishi admitted he needed a sword tough enough to take his magic and only had 10 gold pieces. The young people's eyes snapped to the short sword glinting on the counter. He radiated elegance. She nudged Marl to check out the new crossbow, convinced Marl would love it. Toishi faced a brutal choice. Grab one of 2 swords. Every other weapon carried a crippling price tag. The mithril sword boasted a massive, hulking guard. Its blade was straight, hard, and strong, whispered to be indestructible and blazing with immense magical power. Even if he poured his own magic into it, the blade refused to shatter. The young man adored it. He whirled to Lewis and grinned. Since I'm buying this incredible sword, can you give me a small discount? And the cat piped up, what about that mithril dagger I was eyeing earlier? Lewis screamed that Toishi would ruin him. The dagger hit a pearl of wind magic that sped every movement and turned weapons weightless, like feathers in his hands. Lewis flashed a grin and offered both items for 24 coins instead of 25, willing to shave off a coin to help. He slammed 24 coins onto the table, and the cat blinked, stunned by his sudden fortune. The young man grinned and revealed he'd sold the carcasses of 3 trolls and expected them to hit the market any day. Outside, the girl jabbed a finger and demanded what sword he'd bought. He grinned that he couldn't wait to try it out, and Marl, thrilled, was sure Toishi had bought the dagger for her. She sprang across the pavement, joy bursting from every step, and Toishi called out, "Where are you headed?" Marl jabbed his shoulder and demanded, "You promised me a date." Inside the Concerned Knights Guild, First Captain Waltz roared that Crossroads Knights' campaign had set its sights on goblins. Besides them, the trolls were slaughtered, and the man he spoke of is Mitsubo Toishi. Marl and Toishi sauntered through the city streets, carefree and laughing, as the young man treated her to a dripping, irresistible scoop of ice cream. Marl's eyes lit up. She announced she wanted to dress up a little. He lunged into the storage, tossing boxes aside to carve out space for the clothes they'd buy. He couldn't wait to see Marlon in those cute outfits. They barreled through shop after shop as the girl plucked every outfit she loved. Marl soared on cloud 9 after a shopping spree she hadn't treated herself to in ages, but fatigue crept in. He'd overdone it a bit. He stared. Shops overflowed with second-hand clothes, sewing new garments emptied pockets, so people bought when they had cash, stitched their own when they didn't, and flipped them when someone else wanted them, trapped in a vicious circle. They went on a shopping spree and stacked up so many outfits they were forced to debut them all tonight. Morrow ached to dress up as a dancer. With a sly grin, she pulled out the dagger he'd bought from the shop and pressed it into Marl's hands, declaring it another gift for her. Tears sprang to Marl's eyes as the offering struck straight at his heart. The young man insisted they accept the gift with no protest, and Marl took it, gratitude burning in his chest. Cheers exploded as everyone swarmed them, clamoring to heap on their congratulations. Toishi's gut screamed that something was off. This had to be some strange custom he'd never seen. They reached the hotel and ran into Hoipina, who went wide-eyed when she learned Toishi's gift was coming tomorrow. She leaned in, voice a secret blade, and asked Marl whether she was happy or not. It was a mithril proposal. Waitpina remembered the instant her husband offered the mithril. She melted, surrendering to a rush of stunned, helpless joy. She dropped the bomb. The blazing anvil belonged to her husband. Marl didn't have the faintest clue that the owner's daughter was Hoipina. Toishi stumbled over an apology for barging into the girls' conversation. What hidden truth does that mythological gift conceal? The girls locked eyes, mystery crackling between them and bafflement written all over their faces. Hoipina snapped at the young man. "Why did you give that dagger to Marl?" He shrugged. "I thought she'd like it," and the moment it landed, Marl crumpled into tears. He yanked the girl into a tight hug and admitted he didn't understand her, then spun to Hoipina and pressed her to explain everything. She snapped that when an ordinary man presses a mithril dagger into a woman's palm, he's staking a claim she's his, and that blade becomes the thing she must wield to guard her chastity. The gesture was an offer all along, and Toishi didn't even see it coming. He beckoned Marl to dinner. Hoipina snapped she wouldn't leave him alone with the girl he'd reduced to tears. The young man poured out a raw, sincere apology for making Marl cry. He had no idea the gift carried that much meaning. He blurted an apology for the phony proposal, then checked himself and admitted he'd handled it in a wildly inappropriate way. He took a steadying breath, snapped himself together, and marched up to present the gift in a bold, utterly direct way. Toishi crashed to one knee before Marl, thrusting the dagger toward him. She clutched the gift to her chest as sobs ripped through her again. Hypina spat out a goodbye, declared it was time to go, and looking at Tui begged Marl to stop the waterfall of tears. She lunged at Taishi, clung to him in a fierce hug, kissed him, and gasped, "I'm so happy." Their eyes met, and in the same instant, they both knew the night ahead would drag on mercilessly. Marlan Toishi bolted upright. Morning was already well underway, and he'd overslept. Toichi closed the distance and kissed her with a quiet fire, and she murmured, "Did I wake you?" The night had erupted with merriment, and now they hurried off to dinner. Hopina read the young people's satisfied faces, and everything clicked. She slid an envelope bearing Tuishi's name onto the table. An invitation landed, a visit to the Knights of the Crossroads garrison in the kingdom of Kalindale, and Marl whooped that an invite from the Knights was amazing. Marl Twashi's reaction barely fazed him. If the Knights were their opponents, he'd simply snub the invitation, and the young man urged Marl to stay in the guild until he figured out what was going on. Crossroads pulses at the heart of the kingdom of Kalindale. Every 5 years it erupts to anoint a new patroness, and the candidate must be a nobleman who holds a rank no lower than count. Marl fired the county's pecking order at him, top to bottom: Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, Baron, Quasi-Barian. The Crossroads Knight garrison brooded in the Western District. Why was Tuishi summoned here? Biding his time for the next twist, the young man checked his status. He'd amassed several training points, cranked his sword and long weapon skill up to 4, surged his fighting spirit to level 3, and saw his magic climb to level 3. She watched a man barrel toward him, spit out an apology for making him wait, then challenge him to a fight. He cursed at himself for giving that man even one chance. The instructor declared him the winner, and the young man demanded to know why they'd arranged this training. Everyone watching the training realized he didn't just command magic, he executed sword techniques with the same deadly precision, a rarity to behold. Twaning, leader of the Knights of the Crossroads, strode up and invited Tuishi to stand with them as one of their kendo instructors. The young man bowed and declared it an honor, then admitted he preferred the wild, carefree life of an adventurer and that his manners were rough. Twaning thrust a finger at instructor Vows and snapped that Vows handled adventurers and should inspect this one himself. They're eager to reward him for exterminating the trolls, but the law forbids handing over cash, so they thrust a dagger into his hands as payment. To steady herself, she cradled the weapon in her hands and ignited the appraiser's eye. Nestled in the dagger's hilt, a humble stone pulsed with quiet, impossible beauty. The blade gleamed, forged to perfection, and etched with an intricate sigil Tuishi couldn't crack. Twining purred contentedly that he liked the dagger, but the young man, haunted by whispers that Tuishi wielded powerful magic, felt a chill as he realized the real reason he'd come still lay hidden. Marx, leader of the Crossroads Knights and the Magical Corps and an honorary baron, strode forward to greet Taishi on behalf of the Royal Guard. A jolt of memory hit the young man. A magical cavalry station crouched right beside the knight's training ground. Marx yanked the young man by his clothes. He urged them to bring every detail straight to Mr. Twaning. The Baron jabbed a finger at the colossal magic orb and roared that it was a condition-testing device that digitizes and displays a person's magical skills and abilities. Toishi hesitated, heart thudding at the thought that being found out now might destroy him, but when Mark told him to place his hand on the crystal ball, no reason to refuse, the young man flung his hand forward with reckless boldness. Every eye snapped to the magic ball as Hishi's status finally flared into being. It looked ordinary at first glance, but it hid something incredible. Startled, Marx blurted, "Where are you from?" And Taishi shot back, "I'm from Deko, Baron, why are you asking?" The air went cold, the conversation had just gone sour. Everyone present gaped. They couldn't believe he was level 12, and the sheer force and volume of his magic were staggering. Even his kendo and longsword sat at level 4. Could Toishi already have reached that level before coming here? Walt's throat tightened as he swallowed. No doubt this guy wasn't just brave, he was a bona fide hero. When Twaning insisted Tuishi came from a wealthy family, the youth snapped that he was wrong, and the Crossroads Knights leader cut in, declaring his origins meant nothing. Mark revealed that every time a good person levels up, his abilities jump by 1-3 units, and his magical power is off the charts. That value is abnormal. No doubt Tuishi is a hero. Cornered, the young man yielded and admitted he agreed with them. Then someone answered the question of what happens to heroes. They shoulder a host of heavy responsibilities. The hero has to broadcast his location to the guards and the guild wherever he roams. When the government fires off orders, he must answer and execute them without fail. Twining revealed a second duty, tougher to carry but loaded with perks, chief among them the right to cross borders at will. The young man demanded to know exactly what that obligation entailed. Marx growled that whenever he takes on a government assignment, the state he's in picks up every cost. If he's hired as an adventurer, that coverage doesn't apply. Toishi braced for stricter rules, but then the revelation slammed into him. The hero defends not just Kalindale but the very country he's in. What force could be so deadly it threatens the whole world? Twining pinned the young man with a piercing stare and said the nation hungered for a hero's power, but it came at a cost. Most requests meant hunting down and slaying troublesome monsters. Toishi slammed a hand down and glared at the leader, disbelief roaring. So outside our country the heroes exist only as a force to hunt monsters. The young man locked eyes with Twining's flushed face and snapped that the Count mustn't think anything bad. He just didn't want to quarrel with the government. Toishi's mind leapt to similar stories from his world, like the hero's end. After winning Tuishish's consent, Twining roared that he'd be sent to the capital later to officially register as a hero and decreed they celebrate the birth of a new hero. Mark locked eyes with the boy and declared, "You're Kalindale's first hero in 50 years. It's going to be brutal, but you have to try." Without warning, a strange smell slammed into Toishi's nostrils. He whipped his head to the ring of magicians, hemming him in and begged for a quick lesson in magic. He taught himself and only knew the 4 basic attributes in pure magic. The professional magicians vowed to lay bare every secret, and the young man felt it click in this world. Being a servant wasn't disgusting. His life is his to command, and he'll live it on his own terms. Marl lit up when Tuishi returned and shot him a question about what the knights had said. The young man replied calmly that he'd been certified as a hero. The guild sneered at his tale at first, but Toishi warned he'd soon be summoned to the capital for official certification. The status check had confirmed he was a hero. Toishi snapped his gaze to Marl's worried face and blurted, "Are you okay?" She snapped, "In this country, being a hero is brutally serious. Does he get it?" Marl closed in on Tuishi, worry burning through her voice as she fired the question at her again. At this time, armed horsemen in black clothes and masks thundered toward their destination, the crossroads. They zeroed in on the hero, Mitsubo Tuishi. Ust agreed with Marl, heroes were something to celebrate, but her anger never touched him. Toishi couldn't fathom why everyone wore such solemn faces, so Marl grabbed his hand and led him outside. Heroes are a rare mutation in humanity, one in hundreds of thousands, maybe one in a million. Their bodies stay ordinary, but their magic surges 2 to 6 times beyond a normal person's. 500 years ago, a treaty stripped them of national ties and made them humanity's global force against extinction, with every country pitching in to protect and support them, and even the Demon King who once conquered the world was a hero. When Tuishi and Marl returned home, the girl dropped onto the bed, a small, resigned sigh escaping her. She admitted he had no clue what being a hero in this country meant. They shove heroes into fights with the deadliest monsters beyond the borders, a system built to slaughter anyone who can't be controlled. The moral screams, society shuns heroes, convinced a single hero can match a whole nation's army, and that kind of power terrifies every country. If the hero rips the order apart with overwhelming force and the army collapses, and he rallies the citizens to his side, he can topple any ruler with ease. The royal family and nobles tremble at the name hero. They choose to snuff out the uncontrolled in a swift, brutal purge. The enemy's first move will most likely be reconnaissance, scouts and spies probing every weakness. Toishi froze, eyes wide, as disbelief crashed over him. They were plotting murder, and the terrible reason Kalindale had gone 50 years without heroes was that the kingdom hunted and destroyed them before they could even register. He'd heard that story once, and suddenly Marl's reaction slammed into place. But why go so far when he barely knows this country's traditions and beliefs? Devout nobles here insist heroes rip the world's harmony apart, so they turn into ruthless anti-heroes who hunt any hero down. For over 50 years, the kingdom has been executing adventurers declared heroes, hiding the bloodshed behind faith and the royal family's protection. The moral right belonged to a foreign royal, but her authority here loomed large. Toishi wasn't about to let them take his life for that. He leveled the question at the girl. "Do you really think they're here to kill me?" Marl snapped, "It's possible. So what did he plan to do now?" He crunched it in an instant. His skill statuses were already marked, so they had to join forces. He still had a shot. If Kalindale sent assassins after him, he had to act now. Toishi spun to Marl and demanded, "So defeating monsters levels you up, and leveling up makes you stronger." The girl met his gaze and nodded, confirming it. The higher his level climbed, the more his strength surged, and the young man grinned, snapping, "I've got an idea." Marl burst out, "Should I use my power to protect myself?" And Taishi grinned, "You hit the nail on the head. Now they'd head out to hunt monsters." He had to grow stronger and hone his restraint. It slashes the chance of morale being held hostage. When force is off the table, you win with cunning. Tuishi declared he was heading out on a hike and beckoned the girl to follow. Marl swore she'd follow Mr. Tuishi wherever he went. She set her jaw, vowing to shadow him and hone her skills with every step of the hike. She whipped out her dagger and bolted to join Toishi. They clung together as the young man begged forgiveness for dragging her into all this. One careless move, and the whole of Kalindale would turn against them. Turning to the knights might have been his first mistake, but Marl crushed that doubt and snapped at the young man to stop thinking about it. He wasn't alone anymore. He grabbed the girl's hands, thanked her for supporting him, and happiness swelled until tears burst from his eyes. He slammed his fist, rattled off that he needed weapons, care products, food, and magic items, then turned to the girl and demanded how hard it was to merge with the guild. She shook her head and said it was impossible. The guild answers directly to the kingdom, built to pick out true heroes, hurl adventurers at monsters to slay them, and spotlight those destined for greatness. It enforces population control, forges the workforce, secures the realm, and supplies cheap labor. Whoever cooked up this system is damn smart. Toishi snapped to Marl that they had to bolt this instant and grab only the bare essentials, even though he still hadn't paid for the accommodation. Hoi Pinho felt it coming. He was about to rent a house in the city. She was sure Toishi would propose tomorrow and was already planning to plant roots somewhere in the city. Hopingia snapped, "Where are they going to settle?" He stood at the crossroads and vowed he'd call the second he fixed everything. "They're leaving at dawn tomorrow." Ishii counted on the killers, taking days to realize they'd escaped the crossroads. At dawn, he and Marl surged from the crossroads. The young man ripped open his coin pouch and piled camp supplies, and in just an hour they'd burned through about 50 gold. They slipped through the city streets, every step measured and every sense razor-sharp. By a lucky break, the city gates threw themselves wide, and a roaring tide of citizens' voices crashed against the fortress wall. Tuishi decided to slip past the crossroads knights. Marl pushed them into the southeastern forest. Rumor had it ancient ruins slept in its depths, and cutting through would throw them straight into the kingdom of Miscronia. Tuishi's certainty snapped into place. Marl came from this kingdom. The kingdom of Miscronia stands apart from other lands, pouring its power into protecting heroes. Historical records say the royal line and many aristocrats were heroes, so it's a true haven for people like them. The story kept cranking up, each moment dragging me deeper into something more electrifying. Taishi and Marl charged straight for the ancient ruins, every step driving him closer to their crumbling secrets. On the very first day of their escape, the young people plunged into relentless training, while Tuishi hammered a strict moral code into them on how to face monsters. For the first time, the girls squared up alone and clashed one-on-one with a boar. Toishi realized Marl had evaded the monster's strike flawlessly, but her counterattack fizzled. Maybe she was simply too afraid to hurt a living creature. At last, she felled the boar. It bellowed a savage roar and crashed to the ground. Marl gasped, "How'd you like my fight?" And Taishi shot back, "You need to learn to handle the dagger better." As the sun slid toward the horizon, the young people scrambled for somewhere to spend the night while Marlux hissed a warning. Predators could strike. They were perilously close to the forest. Before fleeing the city, Toi dashed to the guild and asked for the magics the camp needed: a level 3 magic barrier, a surge in magic power, and a level 2 mana restoration. Toishi unleashed the magic shield magic. He slammed his staff into the earth beside the patch they'd claim as camp for the night. Now they huddled inside a crackling magic circle, an unbreakable shield that kept every predator at bay. Marl froze in shock as the young man declared the magic physical. She could press her hand to the shield, and they'd be safe inside, and it would shrug off a troll's attack. Toishi's eyes lit up. He suggested grabbing a bite and yanked food out of the storage room. Hunger roaring, the fugitives tore into the steak, salted meat, vegetables, and soup, devouring the spread with feral appetite. Marl crushed the spices with a grin, savoring the sizzling rhythm of cooking and the comforting presence of her loved one at her side. She swore she was a taster. Wrap meat in bread and the flavor explodes, twice as tasty, so the young crowd folded the bread around every bite and dove into dinner. Under the open sky, every bite exploded with flavor, and Taishi soaked up Marl's company as his problems melted away. Bitterness soaked every blow he struck in his eyes. No matter how you slice it, they'd become traitors to the state. In 3 relentless days of hunting monsters, Toishi rocketed to level 16, Marl surged to level 7, and they could now slice through goblins in seconds. Marl mastered razor-sharp sword techniques. The young man picked up stealth and heightened awareness. The princess sharpened her reconnaissance and survival skills, and Toishi unlocked a Magikai ability, plus level 3 poison resistance while stashing skill points just in case. By the end of the third day, the young adventurers stood breathless before the ancient ruins. It loomed like an ancient temple, stunning and silent. The grounds were breathtaking yet utterly deserted. Not a single soul had settled here. Maybe the surrounding sanctuary's barrier, forged in ancient times, was still holding strong. The young people scour the ruins, eyes razor-sharp as they study every cracked stone. Skeletons clogged the room, frozen mid-prayer like worshippers seized by death, and not a single one bore a wound, making the sight brutally eerie. Toishi shouted to the girl and held up a ring he'd pried from the ruins. It thrummed with energy and seemed to amplify magic. The young man shot a grin and insisted there must be mountains of treasure here besides the monsters. Treasure hunting, he said, was the second, no less important source of income for adventurers. Rummaging the ruins, Toishi snagged a few useful finds, then she froze. Marl had gone pale, and she warned the loot might be cursed. They stumbled onto a mountain of objects, piled impossibly high. Marl recoiled, voice trembling. "I can't strip belongings from corpses," and Taishi snapped, "They won't need them. Removing items is part of the funeral service." She plucked an enhancement ring for him and urged Marl to take something for magic. He wondered if he could stow it all in a non-magical storage to sell later, but he was already plotting something far bolder. Toishi picked out a dazzling ring and urged the girl to slide it onto her finger. They planted their feet on the ancient ruins and launched a raw, aching prayer into the wind. Toishi and Marrow crashed into the ancient ruins and froze at a lone statue, convinced it was the god the ancients worshipped, but the girl shook her head, clearly doubting it. Maybe it was a god once worshipped and now lost to time. Only an expert in ancient civilizations could name it, and the young, they had no clue. The light over the ruins faltered and guttered, and Toishi and Marl gaped, scrambling to decide if it was an illusion or something else. Ghostly figures of people thrust pleading hands toward them and cried out for someone to be sent. One figure lunged, brandished a dagger, and drove it through his chest, yelling for a hero to be sent to them. No one could fathom what was unfolding as the ghostly figures cried out for a hero, and then drove their own weapons into themselves. Bewilderment ripped through her as she stared at one of the girls bleeding, just a step away from him. A boy levitated above the ground and hailed Toishi like a legendary hero. The young man squinted, but his own face blurred beyond recognition. The vision vanished, the young people inhaled in unison. That had been a wildly strange sight. Toishi demanded to know if every past hero had been summoned by the same rituals, and Marl snapped that heroes are rare-born talents. You can't snatch or summon them. In this world, the strongest are heroes, mutated warriors ripped from another realm by ghostly summoners. So who was the hero those specters called into our world? Toishi and Marl crumpled to the ground, utterly spent. They had no clues. Toishi's mind raced. Why was this temple built? Who was that boy? Mysteries don't solve themselves. They demand clues, and maybe he could crack it if he started playing like he does in normal games. They could call him forth too, the exact same way they summoned that hero. The day they first crossed paths, Taishi wasn't at the crossroads. It was deserted. With only a handful of coins and meager belongings, he vowed to become an adventurer. He pressed a hand to Moral's shoulder and dropped the bomb that he wasn't from this world. Before that, he'd come from a completely different realm, a calm place with no monsters or magic, and 50 years without war. Did she know about this? Marl's voice cut through the noise, calm and unshakable. No matter how strange you are, I'll always follow you. She cradled his hand, eyes shining, and cried, "You're the dearest person to me." She begged the moment to last forever, convinced he'd become the happiest person. A razor-keen whine ripped through his ears, and he watched the arrow bury itself in Mar's chest. It struck without warning, and she screamed, desperation ripping through her voice. Gunfire ripped from the ambush, relentless. She slammed a windshield into place, stopping the enemy's arrows dead. They loomed like living shadows, draped in black cloaks with masks hiding every face. Ishi begged Marl, "Don't die, hold on." The killers closed in on the place where their target spent the night and found it deserted. Taishi had already fled with the girl. Clutching Marlin's arms, Toishi tore into the city's maze to throw off his pursuers, but they somehow slammed onto his heels in seconds. He only wanted to patch her up a little. Marl lay ravaged by illness, unable to pry her eyes open. She planted one by the stone column for each of them. He ripped the arrow free and the truth hit him. It was poisoned, a sure death, and Marl looked dead. A black wave of grief slammed into Aisha. Marl had been everything to him. The girl who'd appeared when he first came into this world, the runaway who forged him into what he is now. He worshipped that relaxed, free moral code above all else. He'd never realized how warm life could feel until someone carried you in their thoughts every single second. She could love him, embrace him exactly as he was. Marl no longer existed in any world, and maybe he crossed into this one just to find her. All will to live drained from him, he collapsed to his knees, nothing left but a prayer to God that Marl would open her eyes. The killers slammed a ring around Taishi, convinced they'd caught their target. This was the moment they'd end him. The young man snapped his gaze up at his killers, and the truth hit him like a punch. These were the same freaks who had killed his Marl. She lunged into the enemy's overwhelming ranks, and they assumed the man had chosen to be killed quietly, accepting it with calm dignity. Rage ignited in the young man's brain, leaving only one blazing thought: to avenge his Marl. The crowd of murderers closed in, already within arm's reach. The leader's laugh cracked like thunder as he sneered that this fool had decided to face him alone. What could he possibly do on his own? He forced himself not to care, but a suffocating blackness crowded his skull. All he wanted was to finish everyone off. They'd murdered his beloved Marl, and rage roared through him, poised to tear them all apart. Savagery the killers had never even heard of slammed into them. The image of the dead Marl standing before his eyes seared into him and unleashed a tenfold surge of strength. Rain tore from the sky as Tuishi sprinted back to his beloved's lifeless body. The sky erupted into a savage thunderstorm, as fierce as the fury that drove the young man to annihilate the entire squad of assassins. Only one killer remained. Taishi surged forward to take him down. Aishi leveled his sword, the tip biting at the masked girl's throat. The thought that these freaks had murdered his dear Marl pounded in his head like a merciless drum. The killer bolted, but the magician unleashed a razor-cold ice bullet that tore through the air and sent the villain crashing to the ground. The spell slammed into her, freezing her mid-breath so she couldn't so much as twitch. Tuishi snatched her up and ripped the mask from her face. He snapped at the girl. Were they here to kill him? If so, they'd better be ready to die. But when Tui heard the word mercy, she chose not to kill her, provided she told him the whole truth. Channel a savage spell that hammers searing pain into the killer. He snarled that if she tried anything, he'd kill her in an instant. She has to rip the truth out now. Speak or stay silent, it won't matter. He'll kill her anyway. The girl revealed that the kingdom of Kalindale's assassination squad had been ordered to kill the hero. Tuishi Mitsubo, warriors plucked from the Order of Knights, thrown into relentless training, and forged into an elite special forces unit. Training complete, they emerged branded with one title: Cleaners. Toishi staggered as he realized their special forces were actually units of the kingdom's army. Had the kingdom ordered their purge? The mercenary snarled that the assassination squad forged to kill the hero was the nobility's own creation. Tuishi demanded how they'd figured out their location so fast, and the captive said the head of the knightly order had pressed a hunting knife into their hand, and by following that blade they'd been led straight to these ruins. She leaned in and revealed the knife had been forged using secret sealing techniques. A distinctive sigil burned into his sword's handle, a clue the ruin could use to pinpoint his location. Ishui gaped as the criminal casually spilled every secret, and the woman was useless now. Marl lay dead. This killer had to disappear too. The young man clamped both hands around her throat. His every breath belonged to revenge. Everything else meant nothing. A hush of footsteps slid up behind Tuishi. He snapped around and found Marl wandering toward him, bewilderment written across his face. The young man scooped Marl into his arms and buried her against his chest. He staggered, stunned she'd survived, and the girl admitted she, too, had no idea how it happened. She jabbed at the ring they'd unearthed in the ruins and hissed that maybe its spell had kept her alive. The magic eye hurled a brutal truth at Toishi. The divine ring could yank him back from death only once. Toishi's joy exploded outward, pure and boundless. He drew her into a fierce, tender embrace and kissed her. Gratitude to God for this miraculous salvation thundered in the young man's chest. Marl stared at the dozens of killer corpses strewn across the ruined temple. Then a cold, brutal truth slammed into him. Toishi had done it. He hushed her shaking sobs and swore everything was okay now, that he'd stand between her and every danger, always. The young people collapsed into another desperate hug, and Toishi locked eyes with Marl and swore everything would be fine now. Right then a squad of knights stormed up to the temple ruins as Waltz barreled to the hero's side, breathless, and shot out, "Are you okay?" He stumbled onto the criminals' lifeless bodies and a girl tied up beside them. Toishi snatched up the sword, leveled it at the captain and snarled, "Don't pretend to be an innocent lamb. The kingdom's order of knights sent assassins after you." Walt gaped and blurted that he had no idea what Toishi was talking about. He yanked the captive girl's hair and snarled she'd come for his head. she was a rank-and-file assassin of the Royal Order of Knights, part of the Furamu forces. He wiped out the last 12 assassins, and the stunned captain admitted Tui she had every right to be furious, but pleaded with him to see that the kingdom of Kalindale wasn't just trying to harm him, it was trying to protect him. Toishi smirked, taunting that if the assassination squad failed, Waltz would have to come and trick him into making peace. Was that what they had in mind? The captain barked that he'd misunderstood, and Toishi pressed on. The knights of the country are scheming the same rotten plots as the assassins, like meeting at a crossroads, agreeing to travel together, then murdering your companion in their sleep. How can he believe in anything anymore? Aren't they just toys in the hands of the kingdom of Kalindale? She slashed a blazing magic circle into the air and roared that she'd kill them all. Marl exploded forward, seized the young man, and pulled him back before he could make a move. She seized Tuishi and begged him to calm down. She knew his trust in the knights was shattered, but turning the kingdom of Kalindale into an enemy was unforgivable, because he might try to trust Captain Waltz again. Weren't they the comrades who stood shoulder to shoulder and tore the troll down? Toichi conceded Marl had been right. This captain was their comrade in arms, and Marl stared him down and demanded to know if they could trust him. Waltz cinched a strap around his knee and slammed his oath into the cold steel of his sword. Tuishi and Marl tore out of the ruins and plunged into the forest, scattering the enchanted relics they'd accidentally stumbled onto before racing back to the city. Tuiki pressed for the surviving assassin's condition. They said healing magic had already knitted her wounds shut. She exploded into hysterics, shoving everyone back and barring anyone from getting near. That reaction was inevitable. Even a seasoned assassin had failed her mission, and Toishi couldn't name the killer's ringleader or divine what the head of the nobility was plotting. Ama's forces must be hauled into the dock to face trial and take the punishment they deserve. Does she really think the best solution is to hand this killer over to them? A flicker of pity crossed Marl's face for the girl. Ethan erupted in a joyful cry the instant he spotted Toishi. They'd been apart for so long. He locked eyes on the young people, bewilderment cracking his voice as he spun to the hero and demanded, "What happened?" Ethan cringed and muttered a sheepish apology, convinced he'd interrupted the date he'd had with the beauty he'd left, and declared he hoped they'd team up on a mission again someday. Tuishi had already cast off ordinary routines and thrown away hollow small talk. He felt the current him pull away from this, slipping farther with every heartbeat. Relief slammed into the guild leader. The youngsters were safe, and he admitted he'd already felt a twinge of worry. Tuishi saw the old man had visibly thinned, and suspicion flared. If Oost worked here, did that tie him to the kingdom of Kalindale's minions, and was his worry real or just an act? Us slammed a hefty reward into the young man's hands for the haul of materials Tui she had torn from the ruins, and thanked him for his work. The old man asked what Toshi intended to do today, and Toshi answered he'd rest all evening because he had to visit the Order of Knights tomorrow morning. After that, Oost handed the adventure records back to them. He thundered the news. Toshi had climbed to D rank and Marl to E rank as adventurers, beaming as he congratulated them. The old man asked what he planned to do as an adventurer, and the young man shot back that he just wanted to see how he'd fare for himself. First, everything would hinge on how this country revealed itself. Toshi burned knowing that without that ring Marl would be dead, and with forgiveness off the table Oost asked what he'd do if he sensed something wrong. He snapped he'd bolt from the country, though nobody knew if the nation would let him slip away so easily. He hesitated, mind racing, then roared that if this happened he'd unleash total war. Hapneo's brow shot up. The kids were back after more than a week apart, and he decided their conscience had come to dinner, but the young man shrugged that they'd only come to stay the night, they just wanted to sleep. When the girl asked why they hadn't rented a house, Toisi shot back that it was a lie, and after those recent events, Hopina beamed and offered them the exact room they'd lived in before. Bone-deep tired, the young people collapsed into bed and melted into blissful sleep. Regret hit her like a punch. Just a week ago this very room had been calm, full of silly chatter and pranks, and if they'd only focused on earning money, training, or basic morals, everything could have turned out differently. He looked at his hands, the very hands that had killed 12 people, and fury ignited when they still tried to kill him. They dared to snatch someone he loved, so he claimed vengeance as his freedom, his right. Tuishi lay in bed, eyes closed, clutching at scraps of innocence, and telling himself he wasn't bad. Landing in another world, he decided rules couldn't touch him anymore, so he vowed to make that wild, lawless freedom his new normal. Could all his deeds have led to this? Hailed as a hero, he became the nation's prey. The country hunted him, assassins came to end him, and with his morals unraveling, she risked her life for him. Regret ripped through him. If he hadn't taken that first task, if he hadn't cut down the troll at that moment, everything would have been different. Everything exploded because he clung to the delusion that he was the fantasy world's main character. None of this would exist otherwise, so why did he cling to it? Remorse ripped through Tuishi. Marl snapped awake and barked at the boy, demanding to know why he was sitting in the dark. She was probably still haunted by the image of Toishi butchering those people. She realized he'd done it for her, but she recoiled. She never wanted that, and if she'd known it could come to this, she'd have chosen a different path. If Marl hadn't chosen Tuishi, fate would have been kinder. She wouldn't have been forced to flee the city. Toishi's eyes snapped open and a scream ripped from him. He'd dreamed Marl had died. He locked eyes with the girl and the illusion shattered. It was only a dream. Marl's voice cut through, asking if he was okay. Marl said she'd just shot awake and bolted into the kitchen for a glass of water. She threw herself onto the edge of the bed, scowling, and snapped at the girl. "Are you disappointed in him?" Marl dropped down beside him and demanded why he'd asked her about it, and the hero confessed he'd killed people with his own hands because he thought she was dead. He'd taken as many as 12 lives. Even killers likely have families, brothers, sisters, people who love them, and he still tore their lives away. He snuffed them out. He'd done something that can never be undone. Marl pulled the young man into a tender hug and said he'd done it for her, to keep her safe. If she'd been in his shoes, she'd likely have chosen the same, so there was no point in reproaching herself. She was singled out as the sole culprit. Toishi scoffed. "That's stupid." He spat it was a lie. She swallowed her words, too terrified to speak. The girl whispered that she was very scared. In that instant, Toishi surrendered to his feelings and smashed through everything in his path. He realized giving in to emotion wasn't a way out. Most likely he blacked out then, and he'd hardly wake until he'd destroyed something. The young people clung to one another, pressing their bodies flush together. Moral's hand smoothed Tuishish's head as she murmured a steady promise that she'd always be at his side. Toishi confessed to Marl he'd completely lost his mind, crumpled in front of her crying as she soothed and forgave him without hesitation. She had lived barely half his years, and to his former self this would have been unthinkable. The young man implored Marl to forgive him. She shot back that if you rewind to the very start, it's painfully clear the root of their problems is her. Tui cut her off, voice raw, saying he was just glad she survived but crushed with guilt because the whole disaster sprang from his actions, and still she kept forgiving him. Moral smacked Ishi's forehead, then locked eyes with him and flashed a fierce, encouraging grin. She roared that her twitchy son is no crybaby or weakling. He's the hero she idolizes, and if he can't see it, he's in big trouble. In a lightning flash of understanding, she saw that Marl truly was herself, and she wrapped his heart in fierce, unwavering support so deep he'll thank her for the rest of his life. Marl blurted he's not from this world and might be the supposed hero, and she's thrilled he finally opened up to Tui. Before, every time she tried to learn more, he froze her out. Tuishi flinched at the memory. He couldn't believe he'd once been that cold to this girl. She corners Tuishi with a grin. "Don't you want to know my real name? That I'm actually a princess." But she only piles her problems on him, spins lies, and drags him into one chaotic scrape after another. Toishi leaned in, eyes burning with curiosity, confessing he wanted to know everything about her. He burned to know every detail about the person who meant the world to him. Marl dropped the bomb. Her true name is Meili Vran Miscronia, the kingdom of Miscronia's first princess and the second heir to the throne. Betrothed to a prince from neighboring Jebras, she bolted through a hidden passage in the royal treasury and, racing for her life, smashed the oracle ball that lets you glimpse your future. God himself bestowed this item on the people, the genuine artifact known as the oracle ball. It was a magical oracle ball no one knew how to use. It moldered in the treasury, dust-choked and forgotten, and no one guessed that to use it you had to shatter it. To leaned in, curiosity flaring, and asked, "What happened next?" Marl's voice trembled as she confessed a voice had been whispering inside her head. She wrestled with the voice of God, locked eyes with the girl, and demanded, "What did it tell you?" The princess announced the voice's prophecy. At Kalindale's crossroads, an adventurer's guild would spring up. A black-haired man named Tuishi would stride into it, and she would have to tempt him. She doubted the voice at first, but with no choice, and after it had saved her again and again, she gave in and finally reached the crossroads. Then love slammed into her the instant she saw Tuishisen. Did the young people launch themselves onto the bed? Toishi told the girl she was a real demoness, and that barely scratched the surface. Marl teased, "Keep praising me like that, and I'll only get hotter." He whimpered right in front of her, and she immediately figured he'd be completely submissive to her, and wow, he's unbearably cute like this. Their passion slammed into its limit. Each time she woke, daylight was already blazing into the room. Annoyance prickled. He'd blurted everything to Marlon Vane. His edge felt back, yet one nagging detail still demanded checking. He summoned the voice of God, which thundered to the young man, "I thought Toishi had already forgotten you." He slammed the question at the voice. "Did you tell Marl to meet me and make her fall in love with me?" The voice shot back that it had been Marl's own choice. The voice thundered, reminding the young man he'd been a good boy in the presence of such a beauty. Toishi zoned out, the voice a joke to him, and the knowledge that some shady person had connected them with Marl clawed at him until it was unbearable. The suspicious onlooker realized, bewildered, Taishi had abruptly powered down, like someone had flipped a switch. What else could you expect from him? He was electric to watch. I wished he'd arrived sooner. The day blazed with glorious sunshine, warmth flooding every corner. The Knights of the Crossroads raced from crisis to crisis, tackling one urgent matter after another. Over breakfast, Marl grilled Toishi about what he'd decided to do today. He barked that they had no choice but to go where they'd planned, flanked by guards, and any escape would be doomed. They snapped into motion and bolted for the exit, ignoring Hoi Penius's pleas to rest a little longer. Tuishi snapped, "Marl and I are heading straight to the imperial capital." They flooded Hoi Pina with trembling gratitude for taking them in. The hostess sent them off with a fierce, heartfelt wish for a safe journey. Cards surged down the ribbon road that snaked along the mountain's base. Inside one of them, Marl and Tuishi pressed shoulder to shoulder, accompanied by Captain Waltz and his squad of royal knights. Marl's confession and the memory of that night hit him like a blade. He was certain he alone had killed those 12 people, an unchangeable truth, and that sin would haunt him forever. Will Marrow summon the strength to forgive him? He might somehow pull off making it up to Firmu, but even if he does, it'll look like he's begging for forgiveness, and she might refuse the whole thing. Marl whirled on Tuishi, the abrupt motion jolting Tuishi into a sharp flinch. She begged him not to frown. His face could freeze anyone with fear. In the kingdom of Kalindale, not everyone was wicked, yet a brazen crime tore through the royal army, sparking fierce unrest and leaving its ranks humming with dangerous tension. Marl slammed an envelope into Tuizi's hands and announced it came from Commander Twining. It laid out the progress of the investigation into those ruins, where Captain Waltz had led a detachment. After the Troll's kill report slammed into the top brass, they slapped a tracking seal onto the would-be Medal of Honor, wildly suspicious, yet the status check still crowned Toishi a hero. Command from the high commanders slammed through. "Do not approach the hero for now. Await further orders." It felt deeply wrong, so an immediate investigation kicked off and exposed an illegal squad called the Cleaners targeting the hero. He scrambled to raise defenses, but news exploded that they were escapees from the Crossroads. He slammed the seal, and the first attachment shot out to help. He realized the moment the hero assassination squad received word the troll had been eliminated, they'd already started planning his murder. Reading only the letters to Naive, the truth snaps into place. The army made the call, the troll's elimination is logged on the 1st, while the attack hit them as early as the 6th. On the first day they exploded into a wild party, drank, feasted, then crashed into sleep. That's almost certainly when the report on the troll's elimination was stitched together. On the second day, Taishi vanished on a full-day date, and if Twining hadn't begun readying a hunting knife that day, he would have missed his chance. On the third day, they marched into the knightly order, who checked his status and pronounced him a hero, and that day they packed and armed for the journey. At dawn on the 4th, they left the Crossroads. 3 days later, the ruins rose before them, and on the 6th, before half a day had passed, an ambush slammed into them. It unfolded in a blur. Their moves were lightning fast, and now they must piece every fragment of information into one clear picture. Like Marl said, stitch the clues together beforehand, and you might spot when they'll backstab next. For starters, let's just get all the way through without any accidents. The carriage screeched to a halt, and the driver barked they'd be taking a break here. The royal capital was still miles away. An order to halt cut through the chaos, and Tuishi finally snatched a free minute. He hadn't checked his status and abilities in ages, and with no way to know when they'd strike next or how much poison they'd throw at them, he slammed his poison resistance to the max, 3rd level, and sharpened his sense of presence and danger. Task finished, Tuishi didn't hesitate. He plunged straight into testing the sense of presence first. Planted in the center, he senses the raw power and the roaring mass of people around him. At last, he can unleash this incredible ability. When a name and a face line up, he can instantly tell whose presence he's sensing, an insanely useful power. If he snags the stealth ability, he can vanish from anyone who hunts by presence or danger sense. She also ached to supercharge his production capabilities. A brilliant idea struck him. If the kingdom apologized, he'd ask for a mansion to turn into his personal workshop. Alphen's capital officially houses about 170,000 people. Add the adventurers and roaming merchants jammed into the slums, and the city rockets up to 200,000. Four towering fortress walls ringed the capital, and their carriage ground up to the battered fourth, still under reconstruction, where a jostling row of shops and inns churned the street into non-stop chaos, even hosting a slave-trading platform. Down in the depths sprawls the commoners' quarter, but unlike the wall's edge, it's full of finer shops, snug inns, and buzzing artisan workshops. Inside the third wall, a row of even more first-class shops and inns rises, hosting government offices, churches, a school for studying magic, luxury boutiques and grand houses, and the soldiers and knights who serve the castle. Beyond the second wall sprawls the noble quarter. Silk-clad elites parade beneath rows of guards who enforce their peace, and adventurers have no reason to come here, so you won't run into them. I wish you could stand before the capital and witness it for the very first time. The royal castle loomed like a titan, its spires piercing the sky and dwarfing every building beneath it. Captain Waltz barked a curt farewell to the young men, declared their escort ended here, and warned them to stay sharp. Waltz clasped the young man's hand and, voice raw with urgency, implored him to protect Mrs. Marl. Captain Waltz and his first detachment strode off, keeping up a warm, reassuring conversation until the very last second. Every friendly word laid bare his concern for them. A girl awaited them at the palace, promising she'd grant any wish they dared whisper if they had one. The young people gaped, hearts pounding, struck speechless by the palace's dazzling, lavishly decorated interior. She resolved that marching into the audience armed would be a terrible idea, and he turned to Marl, reassuring her she needn't worry about her mithril short sword. She agreed with him. The red cloth tied to her sword only declared her affection for her partner, so wearing it openly before the royal family wouldn't be seen as rude. Tuishi beckoned his maid, shoved his weapon into her hands, and ordered her to keep it safe. The reception room door swung wide, and the young people were beckoned inside to stand before the waiting audience. Toishi lunged to calm Marl, and she fired back the bombshell that she was a princess. Princess of the Kingdom of Micronia, Malier Varen Micronia, fierce, unbowed, and crowned with iron resolve. Toisha forced out an apology and stepped forward. They burst into the chamber, where their audience was about to begin. Toishi and Marl planted themselves in the palace throne room, primed to receive. The young people surged toward the throne where Kalindale 41, ruler of the kingdom of Kalindale, sat enthroned. The emperor barked for the young men to rise from their knees. Toishi bowed and introduced himself with quiet respect, and the ruler immediately demanded the name of his companion. Marl flashed a confident grin, declared she was Mr. Taishi's guide, reminded Kalindale they'd met 3 years ago, and gratefully thanked him for inviting them again. The emperor's brow nodded with concern as he leaned in, eyes boring into Marl. Even the emperor's guard slipped this time. He couldn't refuse another royal house once the kingdom's second princess was involved. Kalindale snapped for the hall to clear, leaving only Zontak behind, and the emperor's gaze pinned the girl he knew her, Malier Vran Miss Cronia. Marl slammed out that they had a proposal and begged the emperor to pretend nothing had happened. It was Mr. Toy. She stormed into the palace for one reason only, to be recognized as an adventurer, and there never was another. They must bury the truth that hired killers ambushed Toishi and erase the attack on Miss Cronia's first princess. Since the adventurers walked away unscathed, the ruler demanded what they hoped to achieve with this. Marl demanded that, to make sure the same mistake never happened again, they execute every step with absolute precision and keep it all secret. Kalindale agreed, but confessed nagging doubts about their location. Marl spat at the emperor. Make us return to our homeland, and I'll tell you every single detail. If word leaked that the other kingdom's princesses had been attacked, war would erupt. Marl insisted the planned attack stay secret, and that Miss Cronia never discover she was here, 2 ironclad conditions. Preventing any spark of disagreement between neighboring countries was vital, but for the kingdom of Kalindale it was no great feat. The emperor nodded and vowed to do everything she asked. Marl bowed to the emperor, thanked him, then locked eyes and announced one final request. It concerned Lord Tuishi. Tuishi cut through the hush and laid out his request. This would benefit them, so he had to win their favor. The hero whirled to Kalindale and urgently asked for permission to turn Ulfin into their stronghold. Ulfin's capital bristles with cutting-edge infrastructure, and locals welcome you with warm, beaming smiles. He'd leap at the chance to work in a place this extraordinary. While the emperor pondered, Tuishi gritted his teeth. This place, hammered by a torrent of attacks, could prove deadly, but it was the one chance to earn the king's favor. Toishi declared he came as an adventurer by choice to serve here. Money and fame lure him, but he refuses to wield power for evil. He wants to become Kalindale's hero, ready to shield the kingdom from any attack. the emperor, pouring every ounce of his power into the good, declared he understood and ordered Zontak to solve all the issues, and the young man promised that if everything became difficult he would simply leave the country. Zantek von Meister declared he stood in His Majesty's inner circle, a man no one would dare forget. The young people called out their names and erupted into joyful laughter, faces alight at finally meeting one another. Zontak snorted and urged him to speak plainly, telling him not to worry about his manner of speech. He'd had enough of keeping up that stiff, official tone. Messengers from the Scouts Guild delivered word of the hero's plight, but before they could move, everything flipped and the nobles nearest the army bolted. Zontak finally swallowed his pride and admitted it. They'd treated the heroes of Princess Malier in ways that could never be forgiven. Gratitude flooded Zontak. If the kingdom's greatest treasure, Princess Malay, had been secretly slain, it would have been an utter catastrophe, and no one expected the proud noble to bow his head before those young heroes. He cut to the chase for their country. From the moment a hero appears, every scrap of information about them must be seized as the property of the League's member nations. It was announced long ago, but many heroes hate it. What will they think about having their exploits announced? He snapped, "Don't talk about me," and he meant it. Marl echoed Tuishi without missing a beat, and Zontak exploded with a call to take an entirely different route. Yeah, the hero, what were they banking on next? What did they truly want? Tui shot back that he wanted a standard-sized bath for himself and a workshop to forge weapons and mix alchemical brews, while Marl said she wanted a huge bed and a plush sofa, and since her adventures would likely draw many guests, she insisted on a reliable butler and maid. Zontak vowed to bend every action to their wishes, yet confessed fierce obstacles might still derail him. He urged the young men to stay at the castle so he could steal a little time for gardening. Meanwhile, he plotted to undercut the nobles, who enforced a hardline military policy. They pledged to stay in the castle, and from the tower's dizzying heights, peered down at the city with hungry curiosity. They sealed it. Tashiai and Marl would stay in Ulfin's capital. Marl plunged her gaze into Toyasha's eyes, a mysterious smile curling her lips as she declared she wanted something. 10 days holed up in the palace, Tuishi and Marl were killing time, pacing the gilded halls with restless boredom. Moral's heart sank. If this kept up, they'd be hostages for life, and right then the maid charged at them. She barked into the comms, base preparations complete. The young people sprinted to see their new house. Marl whooped, declaring their new base a real mansion. A path led straight out to the main road. The place lay hushed and blanketed in greenery, and Taishi realized the house was far larger than he'd imagined. Cleaning a house that huge would be a nightmare, but Marl waved it off and insisted Zontak would hand the job to the manager or the maids. They stepped inside to find Jack Mason waiting. He announced that His Excellency Zontak had entrusted him with managing the house. The young people then introduced themselves by name, and the manager offered to show them the estate. They surged into the cavernous hall, rushed into the kitchen, and eyed the dining room. At the back of the house, the living room huddled, pressed up against a forge and alchemy workshop. Toishi grinned like a kid. Besides the forge and bathhouse, a fireplace and even a toilet blazed with magic, but he knew it would cost a fortune. She leaned toward Jack and confessed she was impressed. The place felt so cozy, and the manager snapped it was unnecessary to say such things to the servants. The hero figured a courteous old man like Jack wouldn't stand for casual address. Jack draws a salary from the kingdom of Kalindale, but you can't honestly call him their hire. Tuishi thrust a heavy bag of gold into Jack's hands, saying the estate was only now being put to use, and they had to buy countless things and cover daily expenses, use it for food and whatever else comes up. Toishi swore he'd never owe the kingdom of Kalindale. He knew their coin was what kept this house standing. Marl leaned in, eyes bright with curiosity, and fired at Mr. Jack. "Where's the maid?" The manager shot back that his niece was the maid, but she'd gone out shopping. Toishi's memory betrayed him. He'd forgotten the estate's familiar charm. Mr. Jack's niece proved every bit as polite as he was, and just then Mabel burst back in to apologize to her uncle for being late. She apologized for the inconvenience, then declared her name as she introduced herself. Marl entrusted her with their care. The maid beamed and promised Tuishi and Marl she'd be thrilled to work with them. She got so giddy the grocery she'd just bought toppled from her hands and crashed onto the floor. Mabel fired off a quick apology and bolted. Urgent work had called her away. Jack dropped to his knees in front of the young people, begging them to forgive his knees and blaming her strange character for how she acted. Marl fell for the girl and was sure Mabel radiated warmth and friendliness. Mabel spun to Jack and snapped that if he planned to make the first move, he'd better run it by her. She wasn't about to teach him how to treat a woman. The manager proclaimed she'd been talking about her favorite heroes. Mabel leaned in, eyes bright, and asked Tuiza what he wanted for dinner. Any wish he voiced, she'd happily make come true. The boy admitted he did want something, but handed the menu choice to Marl, and the girl groaned that picking was impossible after they'd been gorging on the royal palace's lavish dishes lately. Now she craved simple fish and rice, and the maid beamed, vowing to take care of everything. To thrust his hand up, palm aimed at the girl's, and his eyes snapped wide open. He leaned in and asked Mabel if there was any rice here, and the girl replied that a quick search through Ulfin's markets would turn some up, and Tuishi burst out that he was starving. He burned for one thing, to race. A ravenous hunger struck the hero. He tore through one portion and immediately clamored for more. Tuishi couldn't believe that, after a month in this world, he was only now discovering rice. He chased it through dream after dream, until waking left him starving. Marl narrowed her eyes and demanded, "You really love rice that much?" Toishi froze, disbelief roaring. Could this actually be a traditional product of the kingdom of Miscaronia? He has no choice but to storm that kingdom for their rice. He's still in the dark about this whole world. A surge of nostalgia slammed through him. Was this the taste of his hometown? The hero shot a quick nod, confirming the guess, then attacked his bowl of rice with ravenous gusto, and the princess matched him, devouring hers bite for bite. That shift even fortified their bond with Marl. The bathhouse and the new mansion dripped with decadent opulence. Marl gaped at the vast bathtub, stunned that she could finally bathe in such space. It felt like a dream. The young people lounged in the pool, drenched in bliss like they'd stumbled into paradise, and Taishi fell for this world harder with every second. Marl leaned in and fired the question at the young man. What was his hometown like? He ached to tell her, but knowing technology from that world could warp this world's future, he forced a smile and said his city was peaceful, no demons, no wars. Living there was a brutal grind. Making money proved nearly impossible. Only cash could quiet a person's needs, and Marl scoffed that the whole place sounded like a dream. Toichi Grand declared this was a country where roughly 30,000 people a year took their own lives under crushing hardship, where people were ground down into nothing more than cogs in a rotten, far from ideal society. It wasn't a good place. Marl asked what they were going to do tomorrow, and Tuishi shot back that they'd have to hit the Adventurers Guild in Ulfin first. Their weapons were still usable, but he wanted to buy some new armor. The princess demanded, "Where are you racing off to?" The young man proposed they hit the new city's market to hunt for bargains. Marl lit up, insisted they stop at a rice restaurant, and then, as casually as ordering a meal, asked the hero outright if he was interested in sex. Toishi didn't bat an eye at rice or at sex. She exploded out of the pool, water flying, eyes blazing, convinced she'd won this time. She demanded to know where Marl learned that art of seduction. The girl smirked and admitted she'd just made it up. The royal castle maid laid almost everything bare before her. Taishi gaped at Marl's ravenous curiosity and knew this night would never end. The next day he stormed into the library with Marl, the only place to hunt for data, since he still didn't know much about Iliad, and the stacks were their best hope. Countless books packed the library, turning it into a dazzling treasure trove. Every single book was painstakingly penned by hand. Typewriters probably haven't reached this world yet. Toishi leaned in and asked the princess for a quick tour, and she smiled, granting his request. She revealed that, in its earliest days, LER was home to several mighty civilizations. It's December 3rd, 2,203 years have ripped past since the gods forged this world. Religion knits every branch of people into a single surging tide that pushes them onward, and sometimes gods descend to earth, unleash miracles, and bestow magical gifts. Toisha shot the question, was the man who gave the moral treasure a god, and the girl, realizing he meant the pearl, nodded and said, yes. The ancient books say the Savior, the goddess who forged this world 2,203 years ago, bestowed the pearl upon her, and she trusted Marl. The hero demanded what had happened to the goddess, and the girl answered that she'd slipped into an eternal sleep, her body surrendered to the world to serve as the vessel for a new heir. Each new thing Tuishi absorbed slammed into place. The goddess who'd been speaking moral wisdom to him was ancient, one of the oldest. Why was he ripped into another world, and what chaos followed? Toichi swore he'd sharpen his thinking. His mind had been muddled, and he only wanted a peaceful life in another world. Marl cut in, eyes flashing, asking the hero if he was all right and whether he'd grown tired of listening to her. Seeing he was still listening, she seized the moment and urged them to dive into reading about the continent. Marl shouted the south bites with cold while the north basks in warmth, and that the kingdom of Kalindale and her hometown Cronia sit on the continent called Pit, the first continent. With a flourish, the princess unfurled Pete's political map before Toisha. A battered sketch of Kalindale spread across the table. the kingdom had risen into one of the plains' most ancient states. Their farms churn out surplus crops for trade, agriculture drives the economy, and prosperity hums through the towns. But salt must be imported because the sea is far away and there's no rock salt to mine. Mamula hoards vast forests, strangling the timber industry until it's barely developed. Marl jabbed a finger at the kingdom of Micronia, her homeland that sprawls across the continent's eastern and southeastern reaches. Lakes, rivers, and seas lace the land, turning it into a treasure trove of water resources and a non-stop source of seafood. They call it the land of travelers, a crossroads stitching ports from every corner of the globe, and people whisper that everything eventually gathers in Cronia. The place is awash with water, but it cuts both ways. She hammered home that Cronia delivers sea salt to Kalindale. Doubt gnaws at her. Can Miss Cronia eclipse Kalindale? Jeffels rises in the east of Pitt, a mountain kingdom whose elven villages cling to the edges of the forests. Marl heaved a weary sigh, conceded the continent was pretty much like that now, then leaned in and asked, "What does Toishi like the most?" A young man thought for a beat, then proclaimed Miss Cronia's kingdom his favorite. A wide grin split Marl's face. He practically glowed with delight when he heard it. Toishi locked eyes with the princess and vowed he spoke only the truth, judging this matter with unwavering fairness. Marl's eyes narrowed and she snapped, "You only said that because it's all-you-can-eat rice, didn't you?" She longed for the day they'd stroll around Miss Cronia. Toad demanded if she'd be forced to marry, and she shot back, voice steady and fierce, "No, I won't go back home, so that won't happen." Marl urged Toichi to stretch his legs and take a quick lap around the bustling market. The market crackled with life as merchants hawked meat, flour, and a rush of other goods, including salt that had just been brought from Miss Cronia. Tomorrow spent hours stalking price tags and wrangling rock-bottom deals at every counter. They poured out of the market beaming, the young people lugging armfuls of goods and even snatching clothes for tomorrow. Toei's eyes lit up as she declared the new quarters had everything anyone could want, and he urged a trip to the market outside the castle. Word spread that the wares here outclassed everything else, and the young people zeroed in on a shop that grabbed their attention. The storefront peeled back like a mask, revealing it wasn't a shop at all but a brothel. Moral's eyes went cold as he urged her to leave at once. He didn't need to stand there and watch this. She snapped, affronted, "Do you really like girls so vulgar?" He shot back, cool and blunt, "I'm just curious about what they're selling there." Prostitution and the slave trade run like dark currents through the world's veins. Then a merchant summoned Aisha, boasting his slaves were healthy, obedient, and even skilled in combat. The young man locked eyes with one of the slaves, and a cold shock hit him. This man could be bought and sold like a piece of property. Pity slammed into him as he watched the tiny girls, still children, already slaves. A gut-wrenching, overwhelming pity slammed into Toichi. When he arrived in this world, he was met by a sea of slave-like people, heads bowed, eyes glued to the earth, never daring to lift a single gaze. In an instant, Toichi locked onto a girl being dragged by two hulking men. She fought like a cornered tiger, snarling she'd kill them if they even dared sell her. She was hurled to the ground and went limp and motionless, while the young people gaped, unable to grasp what had just happened. It felt like sorcery, a force that could root a slave to the spot. The slave trader snatched the girl up with one hand and sneered he'd cut the price. Once the goods were theirs, they could do whatever they wanted. Then the men turned and marched off, taking her with them. Tuishi hadn't cracked every secret of this world, but he already read its laws like an open book, the slaves here reduced to nothing but lifeless objects. The harsh, unforgiving truth of his new world slammed into him. Moral, watching Taishi's expression shift, urged him to leave if he felt that bad. Toishi expected this. This world's chaos was par for the course, and now that he'd chosen to live here, he had to swallow it. Even when this explodes into reality, everyone shrugs and treats it like just another Tuesday. The young man leaned in, eyes flashing, and challenged Marl, "You're not surprised by our work." Bewilderment splashed across Marl's face as she locked eyes with the hero, and confessed she could only guess what his world was like. She shoved the whole affair aside. To her, they were nothing but slaves. Debt-ridden adventurers, merchant daughters sold off like cargo, kids ripped from poor homes, and yes, criminals mixed in. Once someone is turned into a slave, there's nothing to be done, so she slams that thought shut and refuses to dwell on it. She lunged at Tuishi, hugging him tight as she tried to read his interstate. Marl urged him to head home, and the hero nodded and agreed. Marl froze mid-step, snapped his head to the side, and spotted a strange girl. She sank against the wall, the first sale sign hanging heavy from her throat, chains locking her in place. Her face slammed into my memory. She could have been Tuishi's double. The killer's silhouette loomed, coiled, and ready to spring. Tuishi and Marl were transfixed. Her presence cut through a line of nearly identical slaves, and they couldn't tear their eyes away. The slave trader caught Toishi's stare, sneered that he had exquisite taste. The girl had only just been delivered into his hands. She's a mid-level adventurer, a martial arts ace. The moment he casts subjugation magic, her will shatters and she obeys him without question. If subjugation magic is new to him, he'll rip the veil off and explain everything. The magic of submission snaps slaves into a living bond with their master, forcing them to obey every command. Disobey and you've torn up the contract's terms. The slave is plunged into brutal, searing pain and may even die. Toei's eyes snapped. This was the exact market magic he'd seen before, and he barked at the merchant. How much for the girl? He roared, it's worth at least 20 gold coins. Aishi barked at the merchant to wait, snatched the contract, and devoured its lines with a lightning-fast scan. Marl, eyes blazing with surprise, demanded of Quixie why this girl of all people, and even if the hero had asked himself, he'd have drawn a blank. Tuishi's mind snapped to one desperate question. If he bought her, could he really protect her? Blood drenched the contract, sealing the deal. Coins clinking in his palm, the merchant snapped that the contract he'd read-bound the owners to feed, house, and clothe the slave, and if an owner no longer needed him, he had to bring him to the market, where the merchant would buy him. The merchant shoved Frama toward Twashi and roared that this man was now her new owner. Recognition slammed into her, she knew him, and the hero beckoned her to follow. He thrust his hand out to pull her up, but the memory of that same hand closing around her throat stopped her cold. The hero demanded, for the move, why her? One slip, one opening, she'd strike him down without a second thought. She hurled herself at her new master, and Toishi had no choice but to unleash crackling magic. Her hands fell like a white flag as she confessed defeat. She'd ended up here, and now he was her master. He snatched a warm blanket from his storage and flung it over the girl, cocooning her in sudden warmth. That single, simple move slammed into Farama, leaving them stunned. Tuishi watched the girl snap back to her senses and begged her again to come with him, though he knew nothing he said would make Ferdamu listen. The merchant barreled up to the girl and blurted that he'd forgotten something. Everyone knows slaves snap to any command, and former criminals are the quickest to obey. A brutal decree crushes any choice. When the master asks for intimacy, the slave is forced to agree. Farama replied, no protest in her voice, vowing she'd do everything in her power. Mabel's jaw dropped. The young people hadn't come back alone. Her breath hitched as the truth slammed down. She'd been sold at the market as a slave. Toishi declared to the maid that Fura Mew was their guest. Mabel snapped that she'd set up the bedroom, whip up a meal and let her soak in a bath, while the other would handle everything in return. Grief slammed into Toishi as he realized he couldn't help her. Any move would spiral into something horribly indecent. Worry slammed into him at the thought she'd be alone. Toichi's breath hitched. He could hardly believe Firmu was still alive after being scorched, battered, and slashed. She dropped to her knees and latched onto Toishi's clothes. He roared, reminding her she wasn't a slave here, she was a guest. Marl barreled to Forum's side and urged her to relax. Marl planted herself at the bathroom door and snapped she was coming in with her, no boys allowed. Toishi strode off alone, convinced the subjugation magic couldn't harm the girl, just as Mabel announced the guest room and food were ready. If he can do anything more to help her, he must speak up right now. Toishi bowed his head and whispered a brief, heartfelt apology to the maid. While the girls endured relentless water treatments in the bathroom, Marl plunged into another soak to prime his ammo once again. She blurted, voice cracking, that she couldn't fathom what toe she was thinking. While she drenched the girls' backs, Marl shot back, I don't know either. Toi Shisen still eludes her, she knows almost nothing about it. His words always pry open her mind and rewrite her whole worldview. Amu finally confessed she was a murderer, and in an instant everything she knew shattered. Marl declared Tuishi was worlds away from murder and cruelty, but Faramo exploded, voice raw with anger, that no such world existed. She couldn't live in a world that yanked even children who couldn't resist into doing the country's bidding. What secret dream does Marl ache to chase for herself? She snapped that Twishison moves heaven and earth for her too, but who truly loved her. The cruel world had spoiled her rotten, and whenever something gnawed at her, she could always confide in her without fear. Mew snapped at envy, is this really her house? Marl snapped that the house was hers and confessed, with a crooked, almost embarrassed smile, that she loved for Amazon. Clarity slammed into the slave and former murderer, every hidden truth snapped into place. Marl snapped at Tuishi, why don't you just stop obsessing over everything to do with the killers? The unman admitted guilt had loosened its grip on him, but he knew relief wouldn't come easy. He'd driven Amu mad and shattered her happiness. Marl's face flamed as he confessed that even with all his strength, he was still only human. He couldn't make everyone happy. For a split second, she dared to believe he was trying to help her. 3 days bled away as Mabel kept coming up short of the mezzanine, the box taunting her just out of reach. Furumu flicked it free like it was nothing, then pressed it into the maid's hands. Mabel's eyes popped as she blurted, "She's our new guest," and Furumu snapped, "She's a slave." She tuned him out mid-sentence, dropped a breathless apology and bolted. She had to go. Framu's jaw clenched. Being both slave and guest at once was unbearable. Doubt gnawed at her. Could she really keep living with them when she'd spent years hunting for a place to call home? She arrived as the third born in a family of battle-hardened knights. Sura Mew burned with a fierce vow. She'd become a great knight just like her father. He sneered, a girl could never be a knight. He pressed her to mirror her sister's polished manners, but Furamu always felt like an outsider. She sprinted toward her place in the world, hellbent on claiming knighthood and winning her father's pride. Her relentless grind finally paid off. Commanders handed her a mission because she already knew the rules of combat, and she clawed her way into the royal army through irregular conscription. She thought she'd found comrades and a place to belong, until one fateful day ripped that certainty away. Every comrade lay dead. She was the lone survivor. The trial played out on her homeland's soil. Her father was flung into exile and his honor gutted. Every dream she'd ever had lay in ashes. Marl let out a hollow chuckle, locked eyes with Tuishi, and snapped that he mustn't meddle in the assassin's business. They shattered him. He endured crushing pain because of them. At that moment, Furamu burst into the room, and everything snapped into focus for her. She ripped the silence with a raw, "I'm sorry. Sorry it had to come to this." Marl snarled that Tuishi just wanted to be a hero. Marl yanked the girl into a tight, desperate hug and shouted that Furamu had been a victim too. Duty forced her hand, and they tore into each other until both were left wounded. Marl shoved his chair aside and rose, resolve hard as iron. She pitched doing it exactly the way she imagined. If the world denies them forgiveness, she'll be the one to grant it. Confusion clawed at Toishi. He couldn't fathom her plan, and Marl shouted, "She's a princess." Tuishi pressed Marl for answers. "What can you tell me about Furamu? What did she do that's unforgivable?" The moose insisted that Marl's words, though they sounded meaningless, actually hid a surprisingly sensible plan. She stormed into the unit braced for anything. They'd been drilled in only one thing, fighting. She was defeated and poured every scrap of her knowledge into others, and the mission left her gravely wounded. Toishi dragged her out of darkness when she was sold into slavery. Will he forgive the sins she committed out of loathing for how people treated her as a slave? Now you know why her life turned vicious. Picture her comrades' jaws dropping if they saw her like this. She's branded unforgivable for her comrades' death. Yes, they killed others, but they were friends. She can't forgive herself, so she hurled herself into the problem until it swallowed her whole. Furamu begged Marl to release her from slavery, but Marl's voice froze the room. It couldn't be done because slavery was the punishment for criminals. Furamu was stunned. Why would this stranger help a slave who'd once been his enemy? In a world where killing was the ultimate taboo, mercy became a revolutionary act. He spun to the slave, pleading whether they'd wronged her and how they could help, then faced the girl and begged forgiveness for ruining her life and her future. The hero slammed his fist to his chest, eyes blazing, and swore he'd atone for his sin. He reached out and beckoned Farum to make their home his. The slave's jaw dropped as raw shock slammed into him at the proposal. The next day, Toishi shot upright, annoyance sparking as he realized he was already late. He tore through every thought for so long that sleep couldn't keep up with him. His jaw hit the floor when he saw Fra Ma in her new clothes. Marlon Mabel had sculpted her into a true lady. Marl snapped that Furamuth saw herself as a slave, not a guest, so they decreed she would be a servant from that day on. Jack admitted Mabel couldn't shoulder heavy work and slapped his approval on the plan, while Amu thanked everyone for understanding her and volunteered to help whenever they needed her. Her heart ached to be loved, too. Tuishi froze, wariness snapping into her. What was she saying? Furmo snapped that she was joking, and the young man found it shockingly believable coming from her. Their blood ran cold when they realized she'd joined their company. She was, of all things, a former killer. At the market, Tuishi was blindsided as some guy bellowed her name. A breathless messenger from Kalindale Castle burst in with a special mission for the hero. Before Tuishi could even grasp what was happening, the castle staff seized him, lashed him in ropes, and hauled him away. At the castle, the maid rushed to her mistress and declared the command fulfilled, everything primed and ready. She burst into the room where Tuishi lay bound on the floor and, locking eyes with him, offered to become her boyfriend. Pinned to the floor in a crooked, bone-jarring tangle, the hero couldn't fathom what was happening here. The princess strode up to Tuizai and declared, voice like a command, that he would be hers, and he accepted it as the highest honor. The hero scoffed. This had to be another prank from Princess Kalonella, the very woman who ruled the kingdom of Kalindale. Tuei snapped that it would be improper if she had no business with him, and he turned to leave at once. No man belongs in an unmarried girl's room. The princess arched a brow and beckoned the hero for a cup of tea and a short chat, but that warm invitation couldn't hide the strange chill under everything. Tuei's bewilderment gripped her. She couldn't guess what Princess Kalonella was about to unleash. He demanded why he should belong to her, and the princess proclaimed Tuishi the bravest man in 50 years. Together, they'd make the kingdom the most prosperous in the world. The princess declared it had always been this way, and the young man pressed her to spell out exactly what she meant. Does she really think they can get close right after meeting, especially since their first encounter was far from ideal, and the girl snapped that she already knew a lot about Toishi. She caught sight of the young man while her father spoke with him. He'd been holed up in the castle for 10 days, and Toishi couldn't fathom why he'd never laid eyes on the princess. Tuishi snapped that he cared nothing for any of this. He helped her father for money and honor, not for power. His spirits were already soaring when the maid glided in and set down a steaming tray of tea. The princess slid the cup to the hero with a flourish. This tea was a luxury only certain aristocrats and members of the royal family could afford. Toishi took a sip and proclaimed its aroma unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Which kingdom could have birthed this tea? It was a high-class royal sleeping pill. The young man tipped the cup and let its contents scatter across the floor, then leveled a cold stare at the girl and asked, "Why do you need it?" His original skill proved the sleeping pill could drop anyone into slumber, so the princess aimed it at Ishi. She knew little about him and shrugged off the young man's courage. The maid dropped to her knees before the hero, voice trembling, and confessed she'd mixed up the herbs. Toishi wasn't surprised. The princess bent her laws to her whim and coldly cast people to their deaths. It felt like a betrayal. Evil had no right to darken the kingdom. Not a mark marred the princess's face from the incident. She laughed, and that laugh only sharpened her hunger to claim the hero. She snapped her gaze to Stella, the maid. Princess Nenera snapped at her, "Activate the pendant." Tuishi's chest tightened. He instantly knew the instrument thrummed with raw magic. Nenera swept the maid into a tight embrace, eyes alight as she lavished her with heartfelt praise. The princess spun to the hero, eyes blazing, asking what it felt like to have the ancient's magic on him, and the young man realized in a heartbeat it was a hypnotic pendant, his body snapping rigid and locked in place. Nenera snapped, "If you'd said yes the moment I asked, none of this would have happened. Now nothing could be done." She fixed the hero with a fierce gaze and offered him friendship. The princess flashed a brazen grin and declared she'd stop at nothing to seize what she wanted. She slammed back the liquid from the bottle Stella handed and leaned over Wishi, who lay motionless. The hero demanded what the princess had drunk. The girl shot back, "Not poison, an aphrodisiac, a potion that keeps even a virgin from feeling pain." Annoyance flared as he realized even his poison-resistant skill was powerless here. The drink slammed into Nenera, and she lunged forward, fingers scrambling to unfasten the hero's belt. The princess burned like a torch, launching a relentless, hungry pursuit of sex and refusing to be denied. Both girls swarmed him, curiosity crackling in their eyes as they set to work with fierce, passionate intent. A fleeting flicker of surprise crossed their faces at his physical condition. Stella's eyes blazed as she begged her mistress not to let a shred of weakness show. Nenera snapped, "Stella, go first." LeMay yielded instantly to the princess's order. Toishi's limbs still refused to obey him, stay frozen, and both the princess and the maid would swarm him, hounding him mercilessly. The maid lunged to yank his pants down, but he summoned a last-ditch surge of strength, wrenched free, and bolted. Nenera's disappointment cracked her like ice. She trembled with fury. How could he run off halfway? Wouldn't he regret it later as a man? Tuishi agonized over who he'd hand his virginity to, then blurted it out to Princess Marl and snapped, "Stupid," at her. At that moment the door yanked open, and everyone's gaze snapped to Marl, who surged forward and asked the young man if everything was okay with him. She devoured everything the messenger delivered. Recognition hit Nenera like a punch. The girl standing there was Princess Malay Misgrinia. Why does she always snatch the best of everything and keep Marl from getting close to the hero? The girl spat that she only wants people, does whatever she pleases, and that's why everyone calls her selfish. Ninir demanded they stop blaming her. Marl had refused the kingdom's alliance, and Ninir had been offended by a letter from her sister, but Marl snapped she wouldn't listen and insisted she knew nothing about any sister Tanev. Toishi clutched his head as panic burned through him. They're actually going to take his virginity over this, and those princesses are shockingly close friends. Elsewhere, the confrontation exploded into assault, and the hero barked, "Were you really childhood friends?" Marl stared at the hero, shock flaring, and snapped, "Why would you assume we've been friends since childhood?" She leaned into Toishi's side, relief flooding her as she realized they were simply getting along well. At that moment, the king burst into the room, flanked by his guards, and barked, "What happened here?" His Majesty stood stunned as strange, impossible events unfolded inside his palace. After setting things right, His Majesty faced the hero, apologized, and shouldered every scrap of blame. He'd been the one who'd failed to keep watch. Tui stilled the emperor's trembling and begged him to drop his fear, but the king had already tried to kill him again and wasn't even from this country, Kalindale, so the 41st stepped forward. It wasn't just that, he wanted to apologize for what happened. The king guessed he probably no longer wanted to help their kingdom. The young man reeled at such treachery, and after those convenient pretexts had been used to try to end lives again and again, Marl faced His Majesty and said she had something to talk about. Word blasted out, Princess Nenera was seized and locked up for 2 months, and the girl at her side was hauled in too. Stella poisoned Mr. Tuishi, now she's staring down the death penalty. Seething, the hero roared that the verdict was a travesty. The princess was at fault, but the maid was condemned to die and forced to carry out her mistress's orders. They drilled into Tuishui that the royal family never errs. If it did, it meant the maid had failed to shield the princess. That was her duty, so the maid would be executed and the princess arrested. Marl told Taishi not to worry, and the young man snapped, indignation blazing in his voice. Is this normal? Marl barreled in, grabbed the hero, and snuffed the panic roaring inside him. Zontak sneered that because the hero fretted, they wouldn't abolish the death penalty or cover up the evidence. If he wanted, they'd hand this girl to him after enslaving her. Marl's voice trembled with gratitude as she thanked Zontak for his staggering generosity. Doubt churned in him. Neither the princess nor the maid would ever bow to those conditions. She recoiled at the idea of being locked up, spun on the hero, and blamed him for never becoming her friend. Had he stood by her, none of this would have happened, and now, because of him, they were going to execute Stella. Zontak strode up to the princess and vowed to take her to the monastery, and at the end, Nenera whirled to Marl and roared that she wouldn't relent until she'd taken everything from her. Marl whirled to the king and suggested they call off all conversation, for today she was bone-tired and would return home with Tuizai. The moment they stepped outside, Marl realized trouble with that girl chased her every step. She burned with joy knowing Toishi belonged to her alone, and the hero awoke the next day flooded with gratitude. Mabe and Furumu exploded with joy the moment their owners returned. Furumu sprinted to the boy and cried, "Are you hurt?" The news hit her like a blow, and her heart nearly stopped. Worry hit her like a punch. She moved through the world wound tight, every muscle and nerve ready to snap. Morals snapped. If anything happens, everyone in the mansion will be consumed by worry. The maids shouted in unison, warning their master to stop before he did something reckless. Toishi's danger sense screamed, and he locked onto poison tea. If it had been meant for Marl or Furumu, even he would have snapped. They'd become his family, and he poured out a raw, heartfelt apology for making them all worry. Toishi melted into the room as if he'd stepped back into his own home, and Fremu beamed that she and Mabel had already whipped up dinner. The moment Toishi stepped back into the mansion, relief slammed into him, and his fatigue evaporated. Stepping out of the bathroom, he froze. Marl was gulping something from a bottle. Toichi lunged at the girl, alarm blazing, and demanded, "What's in that bottle?" Marl grinned like she held a secret, and warned him he'd hardly get a wink tonight. Her body teetered on the brink of exploding from within. Several days had already slipped by since Furumo first stepped into the mansion's service. She jolted awake, resolve blazing. She'd try her best this morning. Mabel volunteered to whip up breakfast while Uncle laid out the table. Ferrum had to strip and remake the bedroom sheets, a mountain of work, but she smiled, thrilled to dive in. The former slave burst into the room, dropped to his knees, and begged the master and mistress to forgive his intrusion. She burst in and caught the young people mid-embrace, right as Marl blurted to Toi, "Do you like maid costumes?" The hero protested it was too much, but Marl shot back that his body begged to differ. One clumsy move left him mortified, and she shut the door behind her. "Maybe we'll whirl to her and snap, 'Did you change the sheets?'" Farah Mew shot back that the master would be staying in the bedroom for a while, so she'd change them later. Mabel's voice cracked with surprise as she demanded what he was doing there so late, and the former slave replied that it was still too early for her to know. Mabel snapped, resentment crackling in her voice, that she was the head maid, but Firmu, unbowed, insisted on taking other work. Excitement surged through Mabel, and the bucket of water tumbled from her hands, splashing everywhere. Some time later, the head maid burst into the dining room and discovered the gentleman slumped at the dinner table, utterly spent. Mabel pressed about the owner's health and offered to whip up something light for him if needed, but Tuishi brushed her off, saying he was physically exhausted to the bone and only wanted to live in peace. Mabel blamed Princess Kalindale for draining the gentleman and leapt forward to offer help, while Farah Mathada insisted they leave him alone. At that moment, Jack stormed into the room, snapping that she'd left the cauldron on the fire unattended and berating Mabel for mistake after mistake. She admitted she was a green maid who knew very little and couldn't match her uncle's skill, but she craved special abilities, so Jack handed her a Tuishi onigiri. Mabel drank in Marl's joyful grin like a soothing balm, and swore Fira Mu's enormous breasts radiated healing the instant you looked. She ached to have either trait to become a better person. The maid leaned in and offered the hero a massage, determined to squeeze every last drop of exhaustion from his bones. Mabel planted her hands on the collar of her master's neck and kneaded the spot with deliberate force. She hurled every desperate effort at Tuishi, but each one barely dented his fate. He whirled to the head maid and asked her to press harder. "She's a girl, not a child," Mabel snapped resentfully. "That's all I can do." Toishi dared the girl to walk on his back with her feet. The maid's jaw dropped. She couldn't even imagine such a thing before. He gaped at Mabel's astonishment. Back home, that massage was everyday stuff, nothing weird about it. His words sparked a fire in her. She kicked off her shoes and granted his wish. This massage method proved far more restorative, and waves of pleasure washed over Toishi. Mabel reveled in it just as much as the owner, feeling the young man's heat pulsing beneath her feet. The maid popped in now and then to check on Tuishish, eyes blazing with glee as she reveled in trampling the very back of the country's hero. Toichi urged Mabel to strike harder, and the girl obliged, an electric rush surging through her. Marl burst into the room and froze, eyes wide, as the maid furiously stomped on Toishi's back. It hit her it was a massage, and annoyance flared because she lacked restoration magic. If she had it, she would have healed the hero on the spot. Tuishi shot back that recovery magic was a godsend, but everything held together just as well without it. Marl snapped, "Pervert, did he actually enjoy being stepped on by a girl?" Massage over, Toshi shot Mabel a grateful grin and thanked her for participating. The head maid brimmed with triumphant pride after helping the master, and the realization set her cheeks ablaze. She spun to the gentleman and declared, "If you ever want another massage like this, I'd be thrilled to give it." Marl seethed at Mabel's words, and Toisha's gut clenched with cold dread. In a flash, Marl shoved the young man onto his stomach and planted himself on his back. She jumped at the chance to step on it too, and Tui cut in, blunt and embarrassed. It was just a massage, he had no fetish for it. Marl was a dead weight, but the girl, defying Tuishi, hopped onto the boy's back and launched into a dance. Toishi begged Marl to stop, then whispered that his exhaustion had vanished, as if by magic he'd never felt so blissfully at ease while being stepped on. Jack shouted to Firmum, who stood outside the door, insisting it wasn't so bad when Toishi and Marl were together, but the girl shot the idea down. She tried to end her master's life, finds his worry absurd, and takes a grim thrill watching the master and mistress. The old man shook his head and hissed, "I hope my niece doesn't suddenly start showing strange tendencies." Cries for help tore through the settlement as a frantic buzz thrummed in the air. Panic ripped through Toichi's mind. What's happening here? Spotting the swarming insects, he hurled a blistering barrage of arcane energy to obliterate the hostile force. The insect swarm careened into an unseen barrier, sending the monsters crashing to the ground. No one even blinked. Everyone had already counted on the hero to act this way. Marl growled that with that kind of force, they'd raise the nest in an instant, and next time they'd kill every last one. The day before, a daring idea exploded into Toishi and Marl's minds. Seeking extra coin, they rushed to the guild and snatched up a request from the residents of Viato village. The day before, at first light, Tuishi's phone screamed awake. God's voice was on the line. He cried out, "Don't ignore me, listen." He had something important to tell the young man. A voice thundered that in 2 months a titanic flood would come. He had to warn everyone else. Toishi glared at the surging waters and demanded Marl explain what had caused this great flood. The girl shrugged, saying there was nothing strange about it, but Tuish leaned in, craving every scrap of information about this flood. Marl said the Great Flood was a nightmare when monsters overran everything, returning about every 20 years, and the scale of destruction depended on where and when. In the last flood, a vast horde surged into Ulfin's capital and left it in ruins. 20 years ago, she was still a child as the maids burst into tears. The palace guard ranks thinned, and many couldn't return home. She only noticed it much later. The girl snapped, "Why did Tui Shisen Lee start talking about this flood?" And the hero shot back that a mysterious voice, the voice of God, had told him about it. Marl reeled at the revelation that he was an oracle, and Taishi demanded he learn everything straight from the kingdom, no matter what. He will storm into the palace and thunder that a cataclysmic flood will engulf the land in 2 months. They hailed him a hero, yet the palace turned its back. Few believed a single word he said. Jack warned Toishi that if word leaked he'd be branded a rioter, and the hero shot back that proving those charges would be nearly impossible for him. If he proclaims God warned him about the flood, everyone will call him crazy. Toishi leaned in and asked the butler to secure an audience with Santaku, and the butler fired back that with the Marquis's backing, they could even call on the temple for help. Marl snapped that the capital's temple teemed with priests who could hear the eye of God. If Tushi went to them, Marquis Zontak would take notice, and Jack vowed he'd report every detail to the Marquis. Only 2 months stood between them and the Great Flood, so they dove into monster hunts, piling up coin and chasing top-tier gear to make themselves stronger before the deluge hit. Marl and Taishi unleashed a storm of magic, sweeping the village clean of insects. Monsters swarmed them non-stop, and when the dust settled, both of them lay gasping and utterly exhausted. Tuishui's jaw dropped at the mountain of materials they'd pulled from the mission. He burned to cram every last crate into the warehouse. Jars of golden, syrupy honey and trays of wriggling pupae, squirming larvae, and glossy giant hornet eggs, each one a prized treasure that would fetch a small fortune. A band of young men ripped apart a massive hornet's nest and vowed to deliver the plunder to the villagers. They erupted with gratitude, flooding the adventurers with heartfelt thanks for their help. Relief exploded through the villagers as the adventurers secured the village in record time, and everyone winced. They should have called the guild sooner. Marl owned up to the hero that at first she saw the request as nothing but a quick cash grab. She never imagined those simple materials could ignite joy in so many hearts. The thrill of being an adventurer lit her up, and Toishi agreed down to his bones. At the guild, after slaughtering 341 hornets, they walked away with a hefty reward. The hall glittered, 95 gold coins, 9 silver coins, and 2 copper coins. Young adventurers' jaws dropped as one request dumped a fortune in their laps. Adventuring became profitable. They struck gold, jars of honey, wriggling larvae, and tough pupae, all rare, expensive ingredients. Toishi rocketed to level 20, and Marl surged to level 11, finally earning the title of an average adventurer. They trained like their lives depended on it. No one knew how many monsters would swarm on the day of the flood. Toishi swept Marl into a fierce hug and beamed, "You nailed it today." Both flung open the estate doors and welcomed the young masters with booming cheers, as Marl leaned to Mabel, grinning, and declared they'd brought top-quality ingredients. Toishi yanked a massive doll out of the storage room and thrust it into bewildered Mabel's arms. The head maid trembled with terror, and the hero, guilt burning him, forced out an apology for frightening her. Her face went dead for a heartbeat as she forced down the monster meat. She announced she'd cook dinner with Mabel, and the head maid immediately snapped she wouldn't touch it. Marl and Tai had scraped together coin from a guild request, and now they needed to buy a proper weapon. Jack whirled to Zantaku and hurled Hero Toishi's request straight at him. The Marquis blazed, promising he'd see exactly what could be done. Marl spun to Tushi and pushed for a quest. That day the young man answered that the mansion held a workshop, and he wanted to forge his own weapon before the flood, and the girl backed him. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected the hero to master both blacksmithing and alchemy. Toishi grinned, thanked the girl for the food, and declared it was high time to learn it. He burst into the workshop, his eyes devouring the array of tools as a grin spread across his face. Every single thing he needed sat ready. Marl peered into the workshop, determined to see exactly what sat inside the forge. Toichi jabbed a thumb at the alchemy table and urged the girl to take up alchemy. It sat right beside the forge. Marl dove headfirst into alchemy while the young man twirled in the forge. Then they'd see what they'd achieved, and Tuishi's heart leapt. If Marl had chosen this path, she'd be someone to watch, and if she mastered alchemy, she'd be an invaluable ally. Tuishi rocketed up a rank and snatched 19 skill points, pouring 15 into blacksmithing to push it to level 5 because he needs a powerful weapon. If he unleashes that weapon on the market, he'll catapult both his and Marl's strength skyward, and for any man, creating weapons is the ultimate dream. Toishi plunged in and designed a dagger, burning with curiosity to see what he'd get at level 1. He struck flint, coaxed a blaze to life, and Taishi already knew how to forge metal and work with tools, his hands honed by hard-won skill. He felt the workshop furnace humming with arcane power, and the moment he channeled magic, the flames erupted into a roaring blaze. He hurled the metal into the roaring fire. When he dragged it free, it gleamed better than he'd dared hope. He snatched up a blacksmith's hammer and pounded the metal until it bent into the exact shape he wanted. His rank had climbed, his strength and dexterity sharpened, forging felt effortless, and blazing hot metal bent to his will. Toishi plunged the glowing metal into cold water, then hammered and honed it mercilessly until the blade was ready. Toishi dragged the dagger across a wet stone until it sang, then whipped leather and wood into a handle, and the young man's jaw dropped when he realized Toishi had finished in a heartbeat. He forged a high-quality weapon from scratch in just 1 hour. From that moment she dove headfirst into leveling up to forge daggers. Second-level weapons devoured endless hours, but when he pushed skills to the 3rd level the door to magic blew wide open, and at 4th he learned to crank up magical power. The weapons shot up to masterwork quality, and the hero dared to craft an item pulsing with magic. Each new level ripped chunks off the forging time and flooded him with ever-deepening knowledge. An avalanche of information battered Toishi's skull until it nearly split, but he forged on like a man possessed, and then realized he'd already crafted dozens of different weapons. He stared, stunned. Marl didn't even flinch at the racket, and she was in the workshop next door. This place had to be shrouded in a magic bubble of silence. Marl burst into the blacksmith's shop, beaming as she whooped that she'd finally secured the magic medicine, then gaped at the mountain of finished weapons. Marla stood beside Furamu as he gaped, stunned by the flawless craftsmanship and staggering number of weapons Toishi had forged. He saw the pair fixated on a flawless dagger. At this level of blacksmithing, he'd learned to forge sacred, magical swords, rewritten how to work demonic materials, and now that he could fell monsters, he could gather the rare parts himself. Marl admitted, admiration crackling in her voice, that Toishi was on fire, and the young man stepped back, sliding the flawless dagger into her hand. His best move today, the hero pivoted to Furum and asked if she wanted anything for self-defense. Her eyes snapped wide. This wasn't just daggers, other objects were scattered among them. She snarled at the young men. Slaves couldn't carry blades, criminals doubly forbidden, since a weapon could be turned on its master, and she could crush every one of them with her bare hands. Marl pressed the gifted dagger to her chest and declared, even if the greatest master carved a priceless gem, this blade still steals the show. It's a sight to behold. A knot of doubt tightened in Toishi. Was giving Marl that gift worth it, and had offering the weapon to Furam been the right move? Marl pressed a bottle of her recovery potion into Toishi's hand and insisted he accept it as thanks for the dagger he'd given her. The young man thanked her, and Marvel whooped that it was a blast. Adventuring thrilled her, and her alchemist's curiosity flared as she vowed to test the recovery potion's effects. In a single day, Marl fought through practice and only pushed her skill up to the 1st level. Lunch rolled around, and the girls announced to the hero they had fished today. Toishi hammered weapons nonstop all day until his skill exploded to level 5, and the blacksmith hammer leveled up too. The hero vowed from now on to forge devastating weapons to face the flood. A few days later, Toshi and Jack charged up to the Zontaka mansion, a hulking estate several times larger than their house. The butler tapped the Marquis's office door like a whisper. The man inside opened it and ushered them in, and Jack declared he'd brought a hero. Tui blurted out why he'd come, and Zontak snapped that he'd known all along, which turned out to be only the tip of the iceberg. The oracles in every temple thundered his flood warning into truth, and nations scrambled to swap every scrap of information. The verdict is in, the great flood will come. The flood's fury shifts with place and time. Apparently the last onslaught ravaged Ulfin's capital, leaving Toishi the country's lone hero. The young man flashed a grin and announced, if that's the case, I've got something. He unleashed his treasury, flinging open a mountain of sabers and swords he'd forged right before the Marquis. The young man declared he'd forged a massive batch of weapons to bolster their strength, about 30 of them. Let the Kalindale troops use them. It's not too late to slot them into the army's ranks. Zontak grasped that the sabers would change the cavalry and vowed to deliver them to the address. But could he scale production to arm the entire country, not just the cavalry troops and adventurers? Toishi shot a sharp yes and snapped that he only forges blades. Call another craftsman for the handle. Making a spear or blade isn't hard. The handle is the real nightmare. And if the country wants to churn out magical weapons, it'll need magical tools. The hero slammed the samples onto the table, and Zontak's inspection ended with one verdict: they too were flawlessly crafted. He promised the boy they'd be fine if he kept cooperating with this country. Zontak believed they could still ride out the flood, but Toshi snapped he wouldn't hand it all over for nothing. He forged weapons from iron, mithril, calcum, crystals, and black steel, and every blade demanded a hefty reward. The hero clung to the hope they'd strike a deal with Zontak. Zontak could crank out blades in a heartbeat, so they had to scramble for the materials now. At last the Marquis and the hero clasped hands, and Zontak, eyes alight, declared he believed the army and the adventurers would overcome the flood together. That evening, just before bed, Marl strode up to Toshi and fired a sharp question at him. She begged him to teach her magic. Marl burned with desperation to be ready for the great flood. Maple leaned in and asked Marl what she was reading, and Marl grinned, saying she was poring over a book of spells. The dust-choked, centuries-old grimoire hummed with magic as the head maid pressed Marl to reveal its pages, but Marl clutched it to her chest and refused. She remembered striding up to Toishi and imploring him to teach her magic. The great flood is bearing down, and she must be ready, so she'll seize magic no matter the price. Imagine her unleashing real magic, pure awe and total game-changing chaos. Toisha nodded, sided with the girl, and dove headfirst into teaching. He vowed to buy her the spellbook called Primitive Magic. Marl's burning curiosity for magic and alchemy lit up Toishi. He said he'd feel so much better if she'd help him instead of fighting, but he stood firm and vowed he'd teach her. Toishi barked for him to grab his hands and interlace their fingers, then drove magic into him, first into one hand, then into the other, so it could surge through his body. Their fingers locked together, the boy's large hands dwarfing the girl's small ones. The hero snapped at Marl to concentrate the magic in her left hand, and the girl gasped as a raw surge of energy slammed into her. Toichi pressed, asking if she was in pain. Marl answered plainly that she was fine. A fabulous surge of magical energy slammed through Marl, igniting every nerve. To each, she sensed Marl could channel a titanic surge of magic, and she herself crackled with her own arcane power. Regret slammed her. She wished she'd told Marl she had to absorb the magical power she'd received and channel it back into her left hand. He drained the power from her right hand. Every bit of magic he gifted let him steal even more, and the strain was beginning to break him. At last, the youth's magic surged through their bodies and fused, while Marl's power edged into Tui Shizu, slowly reshaping itself to match her form. Her magic flooded through him, kindling an unfamiliar heat deep in his core. He drifted weightless through space as Mar's warmth and love poured into him, and the girl felt it too. Toichi concluded this was Marl's soul. Primitive magic bound two hearts together, so the bond could only belong to Marl. Bizarre and uncanny, it drifted like spirits through a dead, silent void. Toishi shouted, panic ripping through his voice, as Tamaro lay there with her eyes closed. Toishi panicked, cranked his magic to a roaring pitch, and slammed into recovery magic. Marl could be hurt because of her own stupidity. Magic coursed through him and strength surged as their fused power settled into his bones with Tuiishi's essence woven through it, and he felt Marl's soul. The first time he unleashed magic, she must have felt his power slam into her. She grinned wickedly and on a whim, branded Toishi an incubus. The hero asked Marl how she felt. She admitted she felt a little strange, then a sudden realization hit her. Marl grinned and pitched, swapping places to kick off a brand new session. Toishi knew the strange, ticklish sensation stirring in him was unmistakably different from before. The hero felt it slam into him. It was real. She was siphoning his magic. The princess barked, sit still, pinning the young man with a fierce, unblinking stare. Toishi demanded they stop this. He still had more magic ready to be unleashed. The girl flung herself onto her back, then twisted onto her side, every motion blazing with raw passion. Primitive magic that swaps magical power and channels forces between people crackles with lethal danger. Power surged through Toishi, and when he ripped open his status, he saw Marl had drained roughly 100 magic units, a serious hit, but the girl should be feeling better. Their raw magic clung to level 1, push it up in that state, and it would instantly snap into a power anyone could siphon. What if they twisted it for evil? Toishi spun to Marl and burst out, I'm so glad we could use magic. The princess flipped the page with a grin and declared, there's more, we can keep going. A whole night yawned before them. Crude sorcery hit the spot for midnight pleasures, until Marl's ravenous appetite snapped Tuishi's delight into sharp regret. Toishi shot awake at dawn, clutching his head as a pounding headache hammered behind his eyes. While serving breakfast, she tossed Toijo a sunny good morning and said she hoped he'd had a good night. The hero clamped his jaw shut, a vague mutter slid out in place of an answer. He recoiled after that dagger incident, when the girl shoved his gift aside and called herself a slave. She couldn't bear it any longer, so Talisha snapped and demanded of Forma, "What do you think of him?" She shot back, voice hard as steel, "He's the country's hero and I'm his slave." Braced for the same answer, the young man dropped a different line. He refuses to call her a slave, maybe that's technically her status, but she occupies a vital place in this mansion, and to him she's family. She told them all, breathless. He came from a realm farther than she could fathom, and when the mansion fell into his hands, he finally carved out a sanctuary where he could rest at last. He swore he'd keep this place unchanged for Furamu. Firm snapped that she'd been rising at dawn to tend him. Marl and Mabel were now chatting with Jack, and the days had already gone quiet, nothing like the rowdy ones of her childhood. He poured everything into her, and at last handed her the chance to feel truly human. Didn't the former murderer despise her for that? The young man shot back, he wouldn't hate a person for such a thing. Furamu snapped that she'd rather he hated her. They were opponents. The timing was awful, yet she couldn't summon even a sliver of hate for Toishi. He pulled her out of the blood-soaked nightmare of her mercenary days. Now she's a completely different person. If nothing changed, hope would die in her chest, madness would creep into her mind, and her future would vanish. At first, resentment blazed through her like wildfire. Furamu grazed Toi's cheek with feather-light fingers and murmured, "Everything's different now." Marl burst into the dining room, and Furamu leapt into action, instantly whipping up breakfast for her. The instant the maid slipped away, Marl spun to face Toishi. She jabbed his arm, eyes flashing, and asked if she could start handling some of his services too. Curiosity seared through her at what Furamu had told him. Toi wolfed down his breakfast and announced he was heading to the workshop. His heart hammered so hard it felt like it would leap right out of his chest. He clenched his jaw, shoved the panic down, and told himself it was a joke, that Mara always came first for him. Tuishi stormed into another meeting with Marquis Zantak, who admitted he'd proclaimed the floods start to call on the country's hero and rally the people's morale. Tuishi's breath caught as the Marquis ordered him to speak, despite his plea to stay silent. Zontak choked out an apology, insisting his country wasn't in any position to ask him, but he knew there was no one else to ask. The hero agreed, voice like thunder, and warned, if anything happened to Marlena's friends, the entire kingdom would become his enemy. Toishi clung to the hope that things weren't that bad, convinced he'd win the kingdom's favor, and that the post-flood reward would be a mansion far sturdier than his ramshackle home, maybe even an entire territory. And watch them choke on his victories as they scramble to pretend they never happened. Meanwhile, Zontak slid a sheet of paper into Taishi's hand, the schedule of his performances, and spotting Marl's problem, the Marquis offered one sharp suggestion. Tomorrow, after listening to Toi, she didn't object to being there too. Marl bolted from the kingdom of Miscronia to dodge a political marriage, and now she'll face every rival, so they'd better listen to Zontak's offer. This whole proposal hinged on one undeniable truth. Marl, Micronia's first princess, who worshipped heroes, left her country the moment a divine revelation struck. She crossed paths with the great hero and anchored him as he pressed onward. The hero and the princess falling in love stuns everyone. People across both kingdoms crown them as living fairy tale heroes. Marl scoffed, sure no real trouble would come now that she'd bolted out of the country without permission, and if she framed her escape as the right thing, her family would have a hell of a time kicking up a fuss. They're skating on razor-thin ice. If she chooses a hero as her spouse, a flood could ignite unrest, her betrothal to the neighboring prince will be dissolved, and every soul in the kingdom of Kalindale will witness their engagement. They can seize the mic and boldly announce their engagement to the whole room. She may have bolted from home, but Tui stepped in and helped her, and she's fiercely grateful to him. Marl snarled that for some time now Toija's been claiming every woman as his concubine in turn, and the hero snapped back that she's his alone. Lately his mind's been swallowed by the flood. The hero's flood speeches loomed like thunder, weapons production surged to a fever pitch, and a mountain of work remained, top priority, hardening every soul in the mansion into fighting strength. Toishi and Marl thundered home, and Forum stepped forward to meet them at the entrance. The hero beckoned the maid into the living room to speak with her. Everyone in the mansion crowded in as Toishi declared he needed to talk about the great flood. He trusted the walls would hold, but you never know what's coming. What if a thief slipped in through the fireplace? So we must act, take decisive measures. He slammed the dagger into Faram's palm and barked that she'd refused it before because she saw herself as a slave. This time she had to take it, for with that blade she would protect everyone while he was away from the mansion. For a moment, embarrassment slammed into them, and they flushed crimson. She hissed that she'd been a killer, but now she was shackled as a slave and forbidden to own a weapon. Toichi's voice exploded across the room. This isn't a request, it's an order. She seized the dagger from the hero and swore to protect the mansion with her life, while Toichi begged her to protect herself as well. She thinks of herself as a slave, but he, a knight of the kingdom of Kalindale, snaps an order at her: protect yourself. Stand your ground and shield every soul who lives in this mansion. Determination flared in the former slave's eyes as she swore to carry out his order. Marl and Furumu lounged in the pool when the princess dropped the bomb that the maid had been taken as a concubine. Furumu snapped that if she ever got pregnant, she refused to drag Toishitu and lure it into it. Marl stared in horror as the girl explained she was a concubine, and maybe Marl wanted to become one too. Marler snapped, incredulous she'd even think about it. Furumu swore to the hero she'd try with every fiber of her being. She apologized, leaned over him in bed, and whispered that, of course, he'd been glad to see her, but his arms refused to hug anyone but Marl. A gruff voice boomed, reassuring the young man that he was a man and had no reason to worry. The hero realized she was a demon with a velvet tongue, whispering honeyed poison, and the path back had vanished. Furumu leaned in, eyes blazing, and asked the master, "How far will you go with me?" Then their lips collided, locking them in a long, searing kiss. Awkwardness prickled through her, but a secret grin spilled out. She loved every second of it. She told Toichi, beaming, that she was overflowing with joy. Their movements ignited into fevered passion, erupting with sharp exclamations and ragged groans. Toishi's mind clicked. She was clearly much older than Marl, and her enormous breasts shook with every movement. Their passion erupted into a blazing climax. Exhausted and breathing ragged, Fora heaved fell onto her back, muscles screaming, then let her eyes slam shut. Toi pressed, "How are you feeling?" and the girl replied that she felt very well. She declared to the hero that serving him was her duty, but Taishi froze, baffled, unable to understand what she meant. Furumu insisted she was the only one standing strong for now, and vowed to keep fighting until she satisfied him. They spent the whole night like this, bodies tangled, hearts inching together, yet a cold knot of anxiety tightened in Tuishich's chest. Morning barely begun when a sharp knock hammered the door, and Marl's voice cut through, asking if maybe they'd had enough fun. Marl burst into the room and demanded she explain why she was breaking her promise. The princess snapped, "I'm not breaking any rules." She burns to join them. Tuishi's jaw dropped. He never saw this turn of events coming. He sprawled between two sleeping girls, convinced he'd landed every man's dream, yet guilt gnawed at him for no clear reason. The girls snapped their eyes open and, in perfect unison, locked onto the hero and asked, "Are you ready?" Jack slipped into the workshop and froze. The gentleman lay asleep at his workbench, so Jack swept a blanket over him. It was about 20 days after they learned of the Great Flood, and Toishi teetered on the brink of death while Marl frantically shoved a vial of medicine at him, desperate to drag him back from bone-deep exhaustion. Marl's been subjecting Toishi to potion tests as her guinea pig. The poison can't touch him, but brutal side effects still leave him reeling. Marl leaned in and asked the boy how he was feeling, and he rasped that a bone-deep exhaustion had seized him and demanded to know the potion's side effects. Marl cut through the panic, steadied the hero, and snapped that it was just some kind of addiction. Then Tuishi ripped open the boxes and revealed the weapon blades packed inside to Marl. At last he hammered out the final blade for Zontic. Marla leaned in, grin razor bright, had the young man forged himself a new weapon. Toishi unveiled to Marl a breathtaking sword, divine silver and crystal fused together, forged through his relentless trial and error. The princess heard of divine silver for the first time, and the hero replied it was often called halcum, an alloy forged by refining mithril, the true silver. It packs halcum's crushing strength while keeping mithril's feather-like grace, and a crystal core at the blade's heart amplifies every spell. She fired a question about her sword at him, told him his goal now was to strengthen their weapons, and said she'd most likely use the mithril dagger he'd given her back then. He hammered the mithril dagger back to life and forged a saber to match for her. She stared, breathless, at the weapon's extraordinary beauty. Marl's voice cracked with raw gratitude as she thanked Tui, she with every fiber of her being for this work. She hefted the saber and carved a few practice arcs through the air, the hero melting at her cuteness while the whole scene crackled with menace. He pictured Marl dual-wielding a dagger and a saber, slicing the air with lethal grace. A flash of realization hit him. Furumu's blade skills could turn Marl into a fighter. Marl beamed and invited her to train in the backyard. The moment Tuishi started gearing up for the Great Flood, he forged weapons and hauled in coin, and wherever he roamed he kept preparing without pause. The guild flooded him with monster hunt requests, so during prep he poured skill points into his magic, blasting it to 5th level and unlocking devastating spells. He maxed both magical and physical enhancements, and his status skyrocketed into fearsome heights. Marl's training hadn't sharpened him. He'd hit level 31, and he was burning to see what the princess had learned during that time. Progress ignited and strength surged through her. Under Faram's relentless training, Marl blasted into the 3rd level of swordsmanship and mastered dual-wielding. Braced and ready, they stood as the great flood's tension coiled through the streets, and at last the day arrived for the hero to emerge. Marl clanked into the armor and Taishi grinned that she looked like a princess. Marl shot back, "I am a princess, and you look like a hero." Toishi roared, "Because I'm the hero," and he and Marl snapped on their mithril armor and waited. Marl yanks off her cloak to bear shockingly revealing armor, and a voice lashes out at Xantaka. Could that skimpy plating actually protect a girl? The Marquis declared it wasn't mere cloth, but a mithril mesh spun from invisible mithril, offering far greater protection than sheet metal armor. Its enchantment bolstered physical defense, and he was sure it outclassed his. He shouted the ceremony would start any second and snapped, "Do you have the text with you?" Zontak's voice cut through the hall as he read that. For the first time in 50 years, a hero had appeared in their kingdom. They organized a lavish ceremony to celebrate the hero's wedding, but beneath the cheering, a deadly truth loomed: a great flood was coming. The Marquis was convinced the ceremony would pull every eye and unnerve him, but it was Tuishi who stood trembling. The city streets swelled with residents, packed shoulder to shoulder, every pair of eyes pinned to the hero's wedding ceremony. Toishi and Marl rode through a sea of cheering citizens in their carriage, many gawking because the hero looked oddly out of place, and the girl at his side was impossibly cute. Rumors crackled through the crowd about the hero's abilities. Many swore he was a troll crusher. He ached to squirm whenever people dissected his personality. Marl whooped to Tuishi that his hero nickname would soon echo from every street, and the news of his deeds would spread like wildfire, while Tuishi's gut screamed that everything was spinning out of control. At least his dignity stayed intact. As the last of the castle's people poured up to the city walls, a booming cry split the air. A great flood was finally announced. The emperor stood before the people of the capital Ulfin and boomed that he had an important announcement. The oracle's vision screams the great flood will crash down in 2 months, but the people sleep easy. This time a guardian stands ready to shield every soul. Tuishi Masubo burst from the shadows as the first hero their kingdom had seen in ages. Fresh into his adventuring life, he single-handedly incinerated 3 trolls, seized the title Troll Scorch, and the king summoned all of Kalindale to greet him. He'll slam the news into the capital. They've also begun developing and producing new kinds of weapons, and their army is about to surge in strength. At their side strides the very woman who steered the hero through his travels, the first princess of the neighboring country, Moliervram Miscronia. She abandoned her homeland to join the oracle, now backs Tuishi with everything she has. She is the oracle's living saint, and with the hero and saint standing together, their kingdom will surely survive the flood. His Majesty burned with a need to remind every soul in the kingdom of something. To remind them of the kingdom's vast wealth and mighty power, the king thundered a summons for every citizen to fight the flood and protect their families and loved ones. The crowd thundered as one, vowing to stand up for Kalindale. Zontak declared to the emperor that he delivered his speech with breathtaking perfection. Toishi and Marl doubled over, stifling wild laughter that threatened to burst free. He scoffed at the title Holy Oracle, calling the guy who jumped on him the very first day they met a saint was absurd, and they even hailed him a hero. They had no choice now, only to brace themselves and wait for the flood. Marl locked eyes with the young man and demanded, "What do we need to fight for? He's neither a citizen nor a resident here. They'll fend off the flood without him." Ishi shot back, eyes blazing. He had his reasons, to test his strength or to seize the king's reward. He knows one thing: if he escapes, regret will scorch him for the rest of his life, and the guilt over the inhabitants' deaths will stalk him with every breath. Marlask's voice quivered. He himself could die. He wanted to snap back, anything's possible, but a cold voice warned the flood might not spawn a single monster stronger than him. He'd hurl himself into the fray to shield her and every soul beneath the mansion's roof. A cheering group of residents spotted Toishi and Marl on the wall, waved with bright smiles, and proclaimed the hero and the saint a wonderful couple. Marl thanked the crowd, grinning, and declared it looked like they'd become popular. Tuishi snapped that he truly had no desire to become their hero. Marl flashed a mesmerizing smile, and the hero's heart ached with the wish to see it forever. He grabbed her hand, eyes fierce, and vowed they'd survive this great flood. He would protect her with his life. The sky snapped to black as a savage wind lashed the air. Tishi and Marl gaped as a towering wall of water raced the shore, and they knew the great flood was just beginning. Just days ago, a strategic council of the Knights of Ulfin, the army of the kingdom of Kalindale, erupted at the fourth wall. Word came that the kingdom held the fortress cities Crossroad, Glodis, and Burlun. Past flood records said they'd stand firm for a week or two, maybe even a month. The real disaster was how their forces were splintered. Imagine Glodis and Burlun falling. Demons will surge down the mountain passes. Moving troops each time, drawn-out fights will bleed the army dry, and one miscount in manpower will hand the victory to the enemy, so you must pin down exactly how many soldiers to send and where to place them. Zontek plotted to thrust the capital's reins into the hero's hands for a brief, decisive moment. Toichi snapped, baffled, "Why me? I'm the leader of the knights." The Marquis snarled, insisting that when the flood hit, he must unleash magic to blast the monster horde away from the fourth wall. The temptation hit him like a thunderclap, and the hero plunged in headfirst. Marl's voice wavered as she asked the boy if he was sure, and Toichi fired back that he'd honed his weapon and trained to rank up for this very moment. He was ready. The level 5 magic he'd cranked up during prep roared to life and surged to his aid. Today she straddled the fourth wall. The day everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. A deafening blast ripped through the air. Flames roared and smoke choked the air as shadowy silhouettes of different monsters stepped into view. Ishish's level surged by 2 the instant he unleashed the magic giant explosion, a pure magic barrage that hurled long-range projectiles and blasted a crater about 100 meters in radius into the ground. Marl trusted that force to obliterate the flood in a heartbeat, convinced only that outcome would make the hero truly happy. Toichi reported the monsters that emerged today were probably not the enemy's main force, and they struck in ruthless coordination, timing attacks to slip through the gaps between explosions. This is only the opening roar of the Great Flood. A gaping black hole ripped open the sky, and in the next heartbeat, a monstrous paw burst out of it. A massive, nightmarish creature clawed its way out of the hole, a living catastrophe barreling straight toward us. Marl wordly hurled the question at Wishy, "Can you defeat it?" And the hero snarled that he wouldn't let the giant escape, then unleashed Big Bang magic. A slab of the monster's paw shot into the air, blood spurting and splashing beneath the city walls. Toichi vowed to erase every trace of the demon and hurled another explosion straight into the huge hole. No knight had ever seen a hand so colossal. It looked like the hero had ripped part of the monster's hand clean off with a blast of magic. If the giant's entire body suddenly loomed here, what could they possibly do? Toishi's pulse spiked. This fight had just boosted him by 3 whole levels. He couldn't even name the monster. He wrenched obsessive thoughts free from his mind so he could hunt down and slay the remaining monsters. The Great Flood has just been unleashed. It's only the opening surge. Crouched behind the door, Mabel hissed to her uncle, "What is that black sphere?" And Jack's face drained as he said, "I've never seen anything like it in my entire life." In a heartbeat, he realized that once this hand vanished, the monsters thinned away. Mabel clutched her breath, praying the mansion would keep them safe. While Furumu warned the monsters had exploded into vicious activity, all they could do was arm themselves, hold the line, and wait. They've got to place their trust in their masters. After that giant crumpled, the monster froze mid-charge, and by noon everything lay eerily quiet, probably because that hulking behemoth had been driving the others to storm the capital. At 29, burning to live freely in another world, she and her crew raced to the royal capital to save another city. A few days later, they thundered into the fortress city of Berlin, west of the royal capital, and along the road, the hero learned to ride a horse. Marl, as always, clung to his side. Now they had to face a dragon. The dragon burst into a storm of flame. Spotting Marl trembling, Toshi yelled for her to stay put and charged at the monster. She grabbed Taishi's sleeve, pleading with him not to go alone, and the hero grinned, vowing a thrilling victory as he unleashed his wind-class magic. His step snapped into a lightning-fast sprint. Before taking down the dragon, he unleashed the line of light and blasted its winged minions from the sky. A savage surge of magic tore through the tiny monsters, annihilating them in an instant. The dragon unleashed a massive torrent of flame at the hero, and Toichi whooped, "I'm starting to like this." They were suddenly nose to nose with the monster. They channeled a focused blast of magic into the monster's skull, and the dragon's head tore free from its body. Triumph lit the hero's eyes as he toppled the fearsome, towering beast. Marl scoffed at Toishi's, only a little worried claim. He was already salvaging something useful from the dragon's remains, but the girl snapped, "Who profits if he's left as nothing but a wet spot?" Toichi burned to shield Marl from danger, and since he could slay the dragon faster alone, he swallowed his pride and answered the princess's plea not to be so reckless again. She whipped out her potion and shoved it into Tui's mouth, forcing him to gulp it down as punishment. The girl snapped at the hero. If the city had been functioning properly, he wouldn't have gotten away with it. She demanded to know if human lives mattered more than defeating a monster. Then they headed to Glove Days. Tuishi resolved to let the wind rip everything away and activated the force voltage. He believed it was better to die peacefully, never tasting pain, and in the city he tore through the demons, obliterating every last one. He hit level 61, but the climb stalled, so he dumped the overflow XP straight into magic, maxing it on the spot and unlocking a torrent of usable spells. Tuishi now vanished and reappeared across vast distances in an instant, leaving Marl gaping, while the journeys snapped into high gear as the transition gates hurled them forward. They returned once more to Ulfin's royal capital, and Marl hauled herself up with a sweet smile, announcing they could rest a little now. The transition gate had brought them back. Tomorrow urged they retrace their steps back to the mansion, and she ached to finally sink into a hot, steaming bath. The hero declared to the princess he was bound for Crossroads. The Knights of Crossroad, a unit of the royal army, sound the alarm. Swarms of demons have been sprouting wings all day, their ranks swelling fast and demanding immediate action. We can't take down every demon, wounded pile up, and our strength is bleeding out. Marl's eyes flared as memories of the innkeeper they'd cared for and the Adventurers Guild members surged back, and she vowed to go with Tuishi too. The hero snapped that she couldn't go into that deadly place. Demons had surfaced, the wounded lay in growing numbers, and worst of all, those hands clawing up from the abyss demanded everyone's attention. Marl realized the hero was unstoppable. No matter how hard you tried to stop him, he'd smash through every barrier and keep charging. She asked only one thing: if things spiral into chaos, flee and watch your back. When Tuishi burst into Crossroads, dread struck him like a punch. The situation here was far worse than he'd expected. He caught sight of an enormous swarm of twisted winged monsters and hurled himself straight into the fray. Walt's pulse spikes. Help from the royal capital could be here any second. Not even their shadow dared show itself. Ethan zeroed in on the fighter, who was ripping into the monsters with savage, relentless force. Ethan whooped, lunged at Tuishi, and cried, "We haven't seen each other in ages." The hero's gaze snapped to the adventurer they'd fought the trolls with. Ethan exclaimed that Tuishi looked incredible, and Captain Waltz marched over to the young man and greeted the hero. He asked to call Tuishi just a warrior. The hero nodded and demanded the situation, and the captain warned the massive spill was ripping open the world and dragging out demons who never show themselves. He gaped, baffled by where so many had come from, as Tuishi hailed their stubborn hold here and urged them to lean on him now. He slammed the force voltage to life and roared, "I'm back at the Crossroads." Watching that raw surge of magic, Itin growled that Tuishi was slipping farther and farther from the human. If they don't blast through that spill first, it won't go down in history. The hero's eyes snapped to a black sphere erupting into being here too, and everyone froze, breath suspended in pure anticipation. Tuishi slammed his scanning skill into action and doubled the magic surging through him. Danger hammered at his skull and he screamed for his comrades to flee. Eden snapped back, chest heaving, claiming the strength of 1,000 men and snarling, "Why should we run from here?" Tuishi baited the ball, and in a heartbeat, the sphere slammed into his chest. Eaton and Waltz ripped his name from the air, their voices the last thing he ever heard. Tuishi hauled himself to one knee, bracing on his sword, and realized the black sphere had indeed appeared. The captain barreled toward the young man and shouted, "Are you okay?" The hero spat that everything was falling apart. He didn't even know if he'd be able to fight in this state if the enemy stormed the capital. He's dead set on smashing the black sphere before any of that can happen. Tuishi unleashed the maximum explosion. A black spear screamed straight at him. That was the plan, and now every blow came hurtling his way. That proved the entity still drew breath. He sharpened his senses, snatched the message meant for the monster, then HQ's command crackled in, "Eliminate everyone trying to upset the balance." Tuishi's eyes snapped to a towering beast, its paws like wrecking balls. It hit him. His opponents weren't mere adventurers. As everyone lunged at him, he locked onto the hero and took aim. A message exploded onto the battlefield, addressed to Captain Waltz. It demanded the adventurers be demoted below rank A. She couldn't even fathom their talk of destroying the balance. He only registered one thing: the monster had locked onto him, and I wonder how much magic he still has left in reserve right now. He watched as the monster's maximum explosion ripped through its own body. Its ultimate attack had sabotaged itself and did almost no damage. He cursed himself for not realizing the monster had frozen him, stealing a single, crucial heartbeat. The lion exploded forward, charging to strike. Time favored him. The monster's devastating strike slammed into its mark, and the hero reeled as a strange sensation surged through him. A black arrow ripped through his body, the monster's terrible face looming over him as she screamed. He couldn't make sense of it. Hundreds of arrows of pain ripped through him, and he hung there, impaled and weightless. Toshi locked eyes with the monster. Its stare burned like a furnace, and he knew with terrible clarity he'd die here. Indifference hissed that bolting and dodging every battle was wiser. He wasn't even from this world. Tuishi slumped into a spreading pool of his own blood, breath shallow as he wondered if the game was finally over. He gaped at his own body as Marl's ghostly figure hovered above, a single burning question clawing at him. Why was she here? Toshi was sure Marl's magic had taken root in him. She asked, "Are you crying?" And the hero couldn't deny it, confessing he'd broken his promise. He vowed to shield Marl and everyone in the mansion. Marl closed the distance, locked eyes with him, and vowed, "I won't lose here." Tuixi snatched the sword's hilt and roared at Marl to wait for him. A hail of royal warrior arrows slammed into the monster as Tuishi planted himself squarely in front of it. The crusade and the Alphanite Order crashed into the fray to rescue them. No one would stand aside anymore, and Toshi grabbed Commander Waltz, roaring his thanks for the covering fire. The hero brandished his sword, drew on his final reserves, and charged straight at the lion. Toshi's heart dropped. He realized the strange, nagging feeling sprang from the monster's attack. He moves without a sound. When his paws sweep the earth, not a single grain of dust stirs, and that eerie stillness twists the knot of unease in his gut. Toshi smirked, convinced that even if the situation spiraled out of control, he could still set things right. He unleashed regeneration magic. He swore the monster's silence couldn't hide its trail. He fired up his track sight, locked onto the black lion's footprints, and struck before it could so much as twitch. In a heartbeat, he unleashed the technique and slammed into the monster, and he knew he'd have to fire that maneuver over and over. The monster still dared think it could devour the man standing before it. Toshi Delta unleashed a brutal spell, slamming the enemy with agonizing force. The monster ripped a feral roar from its throat, shattering the silence. The hero's sword kept rending the powerful monster's flesh, carving bloodied wounds with every swing. Finally, one attack landed a single, surgical strike that cleaved the lion's head clean from its body. The hero plopped down beside that disgusting head and barked, "Who are you anyway?" Is he whispering secrets to the hand that materialized in the capital? The moment headquarters hit his ears, cold clarity snapped into place. This was the unit barking orders at the Black Lion and the Hand. What purpose does this headquarters serve, and who dares to shatter the balance? He jabbed the lion's head with the tip of his sword and snapped, "Speak." The transmission died mid-broadcast. She ached to plunge into deep thought. He was convinced headquarters wanted to capture anyone plotting to tear down the balance, the radicals scheming to unleash massive chaos, strike every country, and decimate humanity. Who are they, what do they want, and who does he have to take down first? They're neither monsters nor units. Chances are it hides something far bigger. The king's warriors surged forward, accusing him of recklessness and snapping, "Are you all right?" He owned up to his guilt and didn't flinch. He could still shield not just Marl but everyone present, and that was enough.